Katrina Wright's brow was originally from Germany. There, she met an American serviceman named Charles, and they fell in love and got married. After their wedding, Charles brought Katrina to the United States, where they settled in a small town called Ayer, Massachusetts, which had around 5,000 residents. Together, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. After leaving the military, Charles worked at a local factory that made knives and surgical instruments, providing for the family while Katrina stayed at home as a housewife. Katrina and Charles enjoyed a long life together filled with happy moments. As their children grew up and started their own lives, Katrina remained active, social, and energetic. When her children visited on weekends, she joyfully danced and had fun with her daughter. It was often hard to find her at home. In contrast, Charles was quiet, reserved, and calm. In 1980, Katrina was on the verge of realizing her long-held dream. She wanted to return to Germany to see how her home country had changed and to visit relatives and friends with whom she had kept in touch through letters over the years. To make this trip possible, she saved money for a long time but was so anxious about the possibility of her savings being stolen that she carried a large amount of cash in an envelope with her everywhere she went. This included outings to local restaurants with friends and family. When they learned about her money-carrying habit, they were surprised and often questioned her reasoning. It seemed odd to them that Katrina wasn't afraid to walk around with so much cash, especially since it posed a risk to her safety. However, Katrina believed that leaving the money at home unattended was even riskier. She felt that if she kept cash, her travel savings would be safe. At 48 years old, she truly thought her concerns were unfounded, at least until May 21, 1980. On that day, as usual, Charles left for work around 7 a.m., while Katrina stayed home a bit longer before heading to her job. However, by 10 a.m., her colleagues began to worry because she had not arrived at work. This was unusual for her. They attempted to call her, but she didn't answer. They also couldn't reach Charles, as he was out of contact during his shift, and mobile phones had not yet been invented. To save time, her colleagues began contacting the couple's closest relatives whose phone numbers they had. They were able to reach the daughter-in-law who lived next door to Katrina. She agreed to check on Katrina. At 10:45, she went to the address. She knocked on the door and windows several times, but there was no response. Her calls went unanswered, and the windows were tightly covered. When she tried to get inside, she found the front door was unlocked. As soon as she opened the door, it was clear that a struggle had occurred in the house. In the kitchen, she found Katrina lying on the floor, bleeding and unresponsive. The room showed signs of a violent confrontation, with furniture, appliances, and books scattered all around. The sink was soaked with water and blood, creating a horrifying scene. The daughter-in-law immediately called 911 for help, hoping that Katrina could be saved. However, she was too scared to remain in the house and waited for emergency responders outside. Paramedics quickly arrived at the house but were unable to save Katrina, who had already died. Detectives were immediately on the scene to investigate the crime. It became clear that the likely killer knew Katrina, as evidenced by the violence of the attack and the fact that the windows and locks were undamaged. This suggested that Katrina either let the attacker in willingly or he had a key. The assault took place in the kitchen, where the attacker used water to wash something in the sink, likely his hands or face. The kitchen remained messy, with blood and water splattered around. A faint fingerprint was discovered on the screen, while a clearer print was found on a toaster lying on the floor. Additionally, several hairs were found clutched in Katrina's fist, likely pulled from the attacker during a struggle. Unfortunately, DNA analysis techniques were still in their infancy at that time, so investigators could only collect and store the evidence for future analysis. Forensic scientists focused on the fingerprints they found. An expert determined that Katrina had been attacked multiple times. The suspected murder weapon, a paring knife, was discovered in the trash under the sink. The murder occurred in the kitchen, and it was clear that the house had been ransacked. The victim, Katrina, had her jewelry stolen, along with an envelope containing money she had saved for a trip back to her homeland. Initially, law enforcement believed the motive behind the crime was the stolen money. However, Katrina was determined to keep her savings, which led her to fight back against the robber, resulting in her tragic death. The numerous stab wounds also suggested a possible personal motive. Investigators looked into Katrina's personal life but found no one who could commit such a violent act. She did not have any obvious enemies and was not vocal about having money in her home, with only her closest friends knowing about her savings. This limited circle led them to suspect her husband, Charles. They theorized that the murder might have taken place before he left for work around 7 a.m. Evidence linked the murder weapon, a knife, to Charles, as it was produced by the company where he worked. He acknowledged that this knife was often used in their kitchen. While many residents owned similar knives, the knife in question had been thoroughly cleaned, which raised suspicions. During the interrogation, Charles expressed deep sorrow over his wife's death. He had been married to her for decades and appeared genuinely grief-stricken. Still, the fact that the perpetrator used a kitchen knife instead of a premeditated weapon was unusual for such a crime. Despite his apparent distress, Charles was subjected to a polygraph test, which he passed. In addition to the numerous stab wounds, Katrina had suffered a blow to the head from a blunt object, likely a lamp found broken near her body in the kitchen. Ultimately, with the collection of fingerprints and blood samples from the scene and after questioning Charles, the police decided to send him home. From the beginning, he was hesitant to go home because it reminded him of the tragedy. In 1980, there were no specialized companies for crime scene cleanup, so he had to rely on his relatives for assistance. Consequently, Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law ended up cleaning the kitchen and removing blood from various surfaces. They also expressed their concerns to the authorities, who believed that Katrina's attacker might have been someone she knew personally. To understand what happened, they explored various possibilities. During their conversations, they recalled a 25-year-old man named Kenneth Walters. Born on August 16, 1953, Kenneth was 26 at the time of the crime. He comes from a large, troubled family. He lives near Katrina, and some of his relatives are facing legal troubles. Kenneth himself had a history of minor criminal offenses. Before reaching adulthood, he had been arrested for participating in a knife fight. Since it was his first offense, he received a fine and was required to perform community service. A few weeks prior to Katrina's death, Kenneth had attacked law enforcement officers. Although a trial was scheduled for the day she was murdered, he was released on bail beforehand. Kenneth worked as a cook at a restaurant that Katrina frequently visited to spend time with her friends and family. While she did not interact with him directly, he might have learned about her possessing a large sum of money, possibly by overhearing her conversations during his shifts. Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law informed the police of their suspicions regarding him. Law enforcement officers decided to investigate Kenneth as a potential suspect in the murder. They spoke with him, but he denied any involvement and did not show any typical signs of a murderer. However, his previous involvement in a knife fight raised suspicions against him. When the police interviewed Kenneth again, he provided a solid alibi, supported by documentation. He had a time card that clearly indicated the hours he worked at the restaurant, which confirmed his statement. His colleagues, who were on duty with him that night, also verified his alibi. Kenneth explained that he left home the night before at 10 p.m., worked the night shift, and did not leave the restaurant until around 9 a.m. the next morning. A friend drove him back home, where his girlfriend could also confirm his presence. He did not stay long at home. He quickly changed clothes, took a shower, and left. By 10 a.m., he was attending a court hearing related to an incident involving a police officer. Given his tight schedule, he simply did not have the opportunity to commit the crime before his court appearance. Kenneth dressed neatly and left for court, where he remained until 11 a.m. Afterward, he returned to the restaurant and stayed there until 12:30 p.m. When he got home, he encountered the police, who were canvassing the neighborhood. They spoke with him, examined his clothes and body for any blood or scratches, finding none, which did not raise any suspicion. A forensic expert determined that the murder occurred around 7 a.m., likely soon after her husband Charles left for work. Detectives believed the crime could have taken place between 7 and 10:45 a.m., when the body was discovered. Given the limited time Kenneth had before the trial, it seemed unlikely that he could have committed the crime and escaped unnoticed. After verifying Kenneth's alibi, he was removed from the list of suspects due to a lack of evidence of criminal activity. However, investigators did not completely rule him out of the investigation as the case progressed, though they did not find any new evidence. Fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene did not match any in existing databases, which were not very advanced at that time. The investigation stalled for 2 years with little to no progress. During this time, a man named Robert Osborne contacted the police, claiming he had important information regarding Catherine's murder. However, he expected to receive a reward for his testimony. Detectives indicated that a reward could only be offered to someone providing valuable information that led to an arrest. Robert suggested that law enforcement should interview Kenneth's ex-girlfriend, Brenda Marsh. At the time of the call, Robert was dating Brenda and was familiar with Kenneth's situation. He claimed that Kenneth had confessed to the murder during a private conversation. By the time the police received this tip, Brenda had already broken up with Kenneth, who was living elsewhere. Brenda confirmed that at the time of Katrina's murder, she and Kenneth were living together. She described Kenneth as rude and cruel. Brenda had a daughter with him, and they were struggling financially. Following the advice of Robert, her new boyfriend, she decided to turn Kenneth in, hoping to receive a reward that would help her situation. According to Brenda, on the evening of May 20, 1980, Kenneth left their home around 10 p.m. to go to work at a restaurant. However, when they called the restaurant later, they found out that Kenneth had not arrived there at the expected time. Brenda was uncertain about what time Kenneth returned home or whether he had gone to the restaurant at all. The next morning, he came back with a deep, fresh scratch on his face that was still bleeding. When Brenda asked him about it, he replied that it was none of her business. He quickly changed his clothes, took a shower, and left for a court appointment. When Kenneth returned from court regarding an assault case, Brenda informed him that the police were already investigating at their home. Kenneth was very upset about this and told Brenda that if the police asked her about him, she should say he hadn't lived there for about a month. After the investigation stalled, they relocated and waited a bit to avoid drawing attention to their escape. Brenda attempted to inquire about the incident with Kenneth, but he brushed off her concerns, stating that it was none of her business. However, one night, while drunk, he revealed that he had interacted with a German woman to take her money. Kenneth's testimony was contradicted by his time card, which showed he arrived at work on time and left only at 9 a.m. Brenda's statements also conflicted with the fact that Kenneth spoke to the police when he returned home and had no visible scratches on his face. Brenda's suspicions seemed unfounded. She could simply be a scorned ex seeking revenge on Kenneth. To clarify the situation, she was offered a polygraph test, which she took and passed. The detectives then decided to conduct a further investigation into Kenneth's background. They found another ex-girlfriend who claimed that Kenneth had also confessed to murdering a German woman, whom he referred to casually. Despite this new testimony, there was still little evidence against him. The fingerprints found on the toaster and faucet in the kitchen where Katrina died did not match Kenneth. This investigation took place in 1982, before DNA testing was available. To eliminate any doubts, they compared Kenneth's blood type with the blood found at the scene, and they matched it. The detectives viewed this as solid evidence of Kenneth's guilt, despite the low accuracy of such comparisons. It appeared that the prosecutor was eager to close the case quickly and needed someone to blame. Given the personal nature of the crime and its brutality, the police decided to thoroughly search for a possible motive. Kenneth had a difficult childhood that significantly shaped his life. He harbored a long-standing dislike for Katrina, feeling resentful towards her and her children. They all grew up together, and Katrina's children often boasted about their pocket money, which upset Kenneth because his family struggled financially. One day, driven by frustration, Kenneth and his sister broke into Katrina's house, stealing sweets and money from her children's piggy bank. At that time, Kenneth was only 10 years old. Katrina was understandably furious and insisted on taking action against him for his unacceptable behavior. Then, Kenneth was taken from his family and placed in a juvenile correctional facility at age 10. There, he faced harsh conditions alongside older teens who had committed more serious offenses. Kenneth found this experience traumatic and rarely spoke about it, yet he held a deep resentment towards Katrina for her role in his imprisonment. Despite the hostility he faced from others, his sister, Betty Ann, supported him. Although she was younger, Betty was very close to Kenneth and always believed he was innocent. Despite Betty's support, Kenneth was arrested 2 years after Katrina's tragic death and charged with her murder. The hearing was set for 1983. Kenneth remained calm about the upcoming trial, confident in his alibi, which was supported by a timesheet. However, from the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. His former girlfriend, Brenda, testified against him, sharing even more information than before. She claimed to have been in close contact with a friend of Katrina's who had previously dated Kenneth. Catherine's friend stated that Kenneth had given her a ring a few months after Catherine's death. Upon seeing the ring, Brenda realized it resembled one she had seen on Katrina before the murder. Photos of the ring were presented as evidence during the trial. The prosecution utilized clever tactics and presented various pieces of circumstantial evidence. Kenneth's lawyer believed he had a good chance of avoiding a conviction and advised him not to testify in his own defense. However, when it was time to present evidence of Kenneth's innocence, the timesheet had mysteriously disappeared. Without it, and relying only on his family's claims that he was a good person, there was no substantial proof to support his innocence. Consequently, Kenneth Walters was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defense argued that Kenneth was fortunate that the state did not have the death penalty, otherwise, he would have faced execution. Kenneth maintained his innocence and requested a retrial, but only his sister Betty supported him. Others believed she was too emotionally attached and forgave him for his past mistakes. His history of wrongdoings influenced the jury's decision against him. Initially, his lawyer believed in his innocence and worked diligently to exonerate him. However, all appeals were denied. As time passed, the lawyer's enthusiasm dwindled. Kenneth lost the opportunity to have his case reconsidered and was left to serve a life sentence in prison. His family believed his imprisonment was due to his lack of financial resources. He could not afford a skilled lawyer. After all his appeals were turned down, no attorney wanted to take on his case. Kenneth accepted his fate, but Betty remained determined. She frequently visited him in prison and continued to believe in his innocence, steadfastly pursuing justice on his behalf. Kenneth had a difficult personality and frequently caused problems in prison, which made it hard for anyone to make excuses for his behavior. He even tried to end his life out of despair. During one visit, Betty was unable to see him because he was in solitary confinement after getting into a fight with another inmate. Once he was released from solitary, they were able to meet, and Betty had a heartfelt conversation with him, expressing her determination to help him get out of prison. Their trust in lawyers had faded, especially since many refused to take on Kenneth's case. Betty felt she could only rely on herself. At that time, she hadn't completed high school and lacked the necessary education. She had also divorced her husband, who had discouraged her from helping Kenneth. As a single mother of 2, she worked as a waitress, struggling to support herself and her children, but she remained committed to helping Kenneth. Betty first focused on finishing high school and then enrolled in college. She managed to balance her night shifts as a waitress while raising her kids. Despite the challenges, her determination and strong feelings propelled her forward. Betty eventually became a lawyer, fully knowledgeable about Kenneth's case but puzzled about how his timesheet went missing. Additionally, she discovered that Brenda, who reported a large scratch on Kenneth's face the day Katrina was murdered, had lied, as Kenneth had been in court, then at a restaurant, and later speaking with detectives. Those reports did not mention any injuries on Kenneth. It was odd that no one else noticed the scratch. Detectives typically pay close attention to such details, especially since Kenneth was one of the suspects from the beginning. Betty continuously reviewed the evidence and found substantial confirmation of her suspicions. Furthermore, she learned that Brenda did not actually take a polygraph test. Instead, Brenda only passed a voice test, which can indicate lies but is less reliable than a polygraph. Kenneth successfully passed the lie detector test, which should have worked in his favor, but this detail was not mentioned during the trial. As Betty investigated the circumstances surrounding Kenneth's conviction, she increasingly realized that law enforcement had seemingly chosen him as a scapegoat. Brenda went to the police after realizing that Kenneth had received a life sentence and admitted that she had lied under pressure from Robert, who hoped to gain financially. She also desired revenge on her ex, Kenneth, and felt pressured by the police. Now, she regretted that her actions had led to an innocent man being imprisoned for life. Another ex-girlfriend also revealed that she testified against Kenneth due to pressure from a female police officer who had a personal bias against him and was intent on seeing him convicted. It wasn't until 1999 that Betty gained access to significant evidence, specifically DNA samples collected from the crime scene. She uncovered a box of documents and samples, including blood and hair, that had never been analyzed before. The examination revealed that the DNA from the crime scene did not match Kenneth's. However, both law enforcement and the public worked to prevent the case from being reopened, while Katrina's family strongly resisted any new investigation. In 2000, Betty successfully reached out to the Innocence Project, a group of lawyers dedicated to assisting wrongfully convicted individuals. This organization had a team of experts and the resources needed to conduct thorough investigations. Betty presented evidence proving Kenneth's innocence, convincing the project to take on his case. She also contacted a female police officer involved in the investigation, who had a questionable reputation and had previously compromised her credibility in another case. Many in law enforcement spoke poorly of her, raising suspicions that she had intentionally framed Kenneth and had not lost key evidence by chance. Furthermore, inconsistencies in the testimonies of Kenneth's former girlfriends were exposed, particularly regarding a ring that was shown to the jury. It was discovered that the ring had been sent to Germany and did not match the jewelry owned by Kenneth's ex-girlfriend. It was smaller and unsuitable for Katrina. Betty sought to find the ring to counter another piece of evidence against Kenneth. She learned that the ring had initials engraved on it that did not belong to Katrina. Ultimately, due to Betty's extensive efforts in uncovering these discrepancies, the case was reopened, and the prosecutor dropped the charges against Kenneth. After spending 18 years, 5 months, and 10 days in prison, Kenneth was finally acquitted and became a free man. He was able to enjoy life again after being deprived of it for so long. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. On September 19, 2001, while visiting his brother's house, Kenneth decided to take a shortcut that required him to climb over a tall wall. He did not realize the wall on the other side was even higher. When he jumped from a height of 15 feet, he fell awkwardly, struck his head, and later died in the hospital. Betty, Kenneth's sister, remembered that those 6 months after his release were the happiest of his life. After so many years in prison, everything felt new to him. Even after his death, Betty continued to fight for justice. In 2004, she filed a lawsuit against the city for the wrongful imprisonment of Kenneth and the impact it had on their lives. By 2009, she successfully won the case, receiving $10.5 million in compensation. In this story, Katrina's murder case remains unsolved and often forgotten. The blood found at the crime scene was tested, but no matches were found in the police database. The identity of the person who brutally took her life remains unknown. Her family hopes that one day, the case will be solved. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Mindy Berenyi. Mindy Berenyi grew up in a small farming town in Antwerp, Ohio, in a middle-class family. Her mother, Shirley, met her future husband, Andy, while she was still in school. At the time, Andy was 18 and had completed his auto mechanic training, while Shirley was 17 and still in high school. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they married just a few months after meeting. Shortly after their marriage, Shirley discovered that she was pregnant by another man she had dated before meeting Andy. She had not been unfaithful to Andy, it was simply the result of a previous relationship. Shirley hesitated for a long time, but eventually, Andy accepted both her and the baby as his family. The couple stayed together for 15 years and had 3 children during their marriage. 2 of the children were Andy's, while the eldest was from Shirley's previous relationship. However, after 15 years of marriage, they decided to divorce. Shirley, feeling she could no longer cope as a single mother, gave up custody of all 3 children. The children went to live with Andy, their father. Mindy always loved her father. However, disturbing changes began to disrupt her life. When Mindy was about 9 years old, her father called her into his bedroom and asked her to give him a massage. Years later, Mindy realized this was the beginning of the abuse. At the time, she did not fully understand what was happening and complied, even though she felt something was wrong. She later recalled that it did not feel like a normal massage. Eventually, Mindy refused to go to her father's bedroom. From that point on, Andy's treatment of her became much harsher. Andy began to manipulate his children emotionally, insulting them and even resorting to physical violence. This caused Mindy's brothers to leave the house. Andy eventually remarried, which seemed to improve the strained family relationships, but nothing truly changed. He continued to exert tight control over Mindy, especially as she grew older. Like any teenager, Mindy wanted to spend time with her friends, but her father would not allow it. His behavior became increasingly controlling and manipulative. When Mindy got a job at a nearby McDonald's, Andy kept a close eye on her. He tracked the mileage on his car when she drove, frequently searched her room, and even recorded and listened to Mindy's phone conversations. When Andy was away from home, he turned off his phone to prevent his daughter from communicating with anyone without his supervision. She wanted to stay in touch with her friends and live like a normal teenager, but this angered her father. He would eavesdrop on Mindy's conversations and immediately disconnect her phone from the network if he heard something he disliked. He demanded complete obedience from her, but Mindy refused to comply. When Mindy turned 16, Andy's behavior became increasingly dangerous. He would grab and strangle her when she resisted his control. He would throw her around and beat her while trying to avoid leaving any evidence. The situation worsened when Andy discovered she was pregnant, although the identity of the father was unknown. Mindy was devastated, unable to imagine raising a child in such a hostile environment. Her father's abusive behavior had become unbearable, and she feared for her life and well-being. That same day, Mindy stormed into Andy's upstairs bedroom and grabbed a shotgun hanging on the wall. She then ran into the bathroom, intending to take her own life. Andy was not home at the time, but by the time Mindy changed her mind and decided to put the shotgun away to avoid her father's detection, it was too late. When Andy walked in and saw his daughter holding the gun, he immediately flew into a rage. Mindy later said she was terrified and thought she was in serious trouble. Andy turned away to close the door, saying he would deal with her right away. Moments later, a gunshot rang out. At approximately 4:16 p.m. on September 27th, Joni, Andy's second wife, called the police. When police arrived at the scene, they found Andy lying on the floor. Mindy claimed that she had acted in self-defense. According to Mindy, she had endured years of abuse, along with constant psychological pressure and total control from her abusive father, Andy, who would punish her for even the smallest mistakes. In an attempt to defend herself, she accidentally shot and killed her father. Lawyers accepted her testimony and planned to fight for her acquittal. However, a significant challenge was that Mindy rarely spoke about her struggles or the abuse she endured. Her father, Andy, had restricted her interactions with others, only allowing her to communicate with others when he was supervised. As a result, she had no opportunity to confide in her friends or anyone else about her situation. Additionally, there were no bruises or injuries on her body. This lack of evidence created serious obstacles to convincing the jury that this was indeed a case of self-defense. Shirley, Mindy's mother, supported her daughter's testimony. Mindy had repeatedly complained about her father's abusive behavior, but Shirley had dismissed each time as isolated incidents. Mindy would then reassure her mother that everything was fine, leading her to believe that her daughter was exaggerating. Now, Mindy claimed that her father had threatened her, and Shirley admitted that Andy had behaved similarly throughout their marriage. While at the police station, Shirley revealed that she had also suffered abusive behavior from her husband, which was the main reason for their divorce. However, she did not expect that Andy would use the same tactics on their daughter. The situation became even more complicated when Mindy faced information isolation. She was unable to socialize comfortably with others and could only occasionally spend a few minutes on the phone without Andy's supervision. Despite everything, Shirley supported her daughter. Andy's second wife, Joni, who had been married to him for 8 years, defended him. She described Andy as a loving husband and devoted father, raising 2 sons and doing his best for his ungrateful daughter, Mindy. She saw him as a decent man who was unfairly labeled a tyrant to justify the murder. According to Joni, Andy spent much of his free time with his children, often taking them to the nearby river to fish and boat. This account was supported by all of Andy's neighbors. Joni described her husband as a hardworking man who devoted his life to his family. Andy's relatives were steadfast in their support of him, insisting that he was never cruel or manipulative. From the beginning, they described Mindy as an insecure and disobedient child whose negative traits worsened as she grew older. They portrayed her as a pathological liar and a rebellious individual who frequently tried to run away from home and even stole her father's car several times. Andy also suspects that she may be using illegal substances. Concerned about her behavior, he believes that strict rules need to be put in place to deal with the situation. Andy's relatives claim that this was not an act of self-defense, but rather a brutal and calculated murder by Mindy. They allege that she killed her father, a man who did everything in his power to keep his daughter out of trouble. Joni reported that Andy had blocked Mindy's phone. This was because Mindy had been calling her friends frequently, often planning to run away. He later discovered that Mindy had been skipping work, which led him to periodically check her car's mileage to ensure she did not lose her job at McDonald's. Andy also began searching her room after suspecting that she was smoking. Based on these actions, Andy's behavior appeared consistent with that of a controlling yet concerned parent. In the months leading up to the murder, Joni kept a diary documenting many of Mindy's disturbing behaviors. Mindy was described as a rule breaker. Joni's diary recorded every attempt Mindy made to run away, which had happened 3 times in the past 2 months. The diary also described how Mindy spent days lying in bed, drinking, and being dishonest. Because of this behavior, her loved ones found it impossible to trust her. According to Joni, Mindy's behavior was so out of control that Joni feared for her own safety. She overheard Mindy say things to her father that made her feel extremely insecure. This behavior continued for years. According to Joni, Andy only lost his temper once. On that occasion, he grabbed Mindy by the neck and pushed her against a wall. However, it was clear that he had no intention of harming her. Joni categorically denied that there was any abuse toward Mindy. She also stated that she never heard Andy insult his daughter, call her worthless, emotionally pressure her, or humiliate her, as Mindy had described. Joni was home when Andy died. She noticed that Mindy was acting strangely throughout the day but did not think much of it. Everything changed when Joni heard a loud bang. She immediately ran downstairs and saw Mindy pointing a gun at her. Joni quickly retrieved the gun, and no one was hurt. At first, she thought Mindy was just trying to get attention. However, when she went into the kitchen, Joni saw Andy lying on the floor near the entrance through the open door. She called out to him, but he did not respond. When she got closer, she realized he was dead. Mindy killed her father, whom she had hated for years, seemingly without any particular reason. Joni claimed that Andy had always tried to support and protect Mindy from the hardships of life. When the police arrived at the scene, they arrested Mindy and took her to the sheriff's office, where she tearfully confessed to the murder. At the police station, Joni stated that the act was intentional. She believed Mindy was manipulative and untrustworthy. The lawyers sought to damage Andy's reputation, as it was the only way to prove Mindy's innocence. From the beginning, Joni believed that Mindy was trying to deceive everyone to avoid responsibility for her terrible crime. However, the lawyers argued that Mindy had suffered years of emotional and physical abuse and only acted in self-defense when she felt her life and the life of her unborn child was in danger. Mindy, who had recently found out she was pregnant, was terrified, believing that her father would kill her if he found out. Mindy's strongest supporter remained her mother, Shirley. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence, including a poem found in Mindy's notebook, which had been discovered in her nightstand. The poem described the murder and was accompanied by a small drawing of a bleeding heart being stabbed with a knife. According to the prosecution, this suggested that Mindy had carefully planned the crime. The prosecution argued that when Mindy took the weapon from her father's room, she did not intend to kill herself. Instead, they claimed that she had taken the weapon and ambushed her father. Forensic scientists determined that Andy had been shot in the back with a shotgun, refuting the claim that he had attacked first. He could not have attacked with his back turned. A neighbor testified on behalf of the prosecution, stating that he was about 40 yards from the house when Andy opened the door. The neighbor said everything was quiet, and he did not hear Andy swearing or making threats, contrary to Mindy's claim. According to the neighbor, Andy simply walked into the house, and 10 seconds later, gunshots rang out. The defense attorneys argued that Mindy had been overwhelmed and scared for her life, and that she had acted in self-defense as she prepared to become a mother at a young age. The defense presented a key witness, Mindy's mother, Shirley, who described Andy as a cruel and abusive manipulator who had mistreated her and her older sons. Shirley explained that Andy would force the family to sit at the kitchen table for hours, humiliating and insulting them while clearly enjoying their discomfort. She noted that throughout their marriage, Mindy had been spared from these attacks only because she was so young at the time. However, after Shirley left, Andy's anger turned toward his daughter. Things changed when Mindy turned 15 and called Shirley for the first time, saying she could no longer tolerate Andy's bullying behavior. During this time, Mindy's mental state became extremely concerning. She was admitted to a clinic, where she was diagnosed with depression and had attempted suicide. She stayed there for 9 days, was given medication, and was discharged after her condition was deemed stable. However, her father's pressure and abuse continued. According to Mindy, this caused her to develop paranoia. She felt trapped, like a prisoner in her own home, unable to escape her overbearing father. To cope with her fear and pain, she began drinking and smoking marijuana. This behavior eventually attracted the attention of social services. However, it was Andy who contacted them, hoping to address what he described as Mindy's disturbing behavior. Andy was surprised when Laura Alvarado, a child abuse investigator, sided with Mindy after speaking with her. Laura believed that Mindy was not being defiant or out of control. Instead, it appeared that the teenager was feeling anxious and threatened at home. Mindy had pleaded for help, even expressing a desire to move into a foster home to escape her father. She also revealed that her mother had refused to take her in, unwilling to intervene because of the custody agreement. To Laura, this seemed less like the behavior of a rebellious teenager and more like a child who felt trapped and hopeless. Laura had several conversations with Mindy, but during their last meeting, something seemed different and more troubling. Mindy appeared closed off and unwilling to open up. Laura suspected that Andy had threatened her, but further investigation revealed no solid evidence. The most anticipated part of the hearing was Mindy's testimony in her own defense. This was a high-risk strategy, as it could either persuade the jury to sympathize with her or push them in the opposite direction. The outcome depended entirely on whether the jury believed her. Initially, Mindy's attorney decided to take the gamble, arguing that only Mindy could prove who was telling the truth and who was lying. However, the odds were clearly against her. Ultimately, the defense counsel advised taking a safer route. Mindy agreed to a plea bargain, which resulted in a reduced sentence of 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Soon after, the situation changed. At age 20, Mindy had already served 4 years in prison and was now focused on seeking justice and regaining her freedom. During this time, the legal system had recognized mental distress as a valid defense, even in murder cases. This change provided a new perspective for Mindy's attorney. An appeal was filed and eventually accepted. However, the appeal came with significant risks. If the jury rejected Mindy's testimony, she could face life in prison, with a minimum of 33 years before she could apply for early release. Despite the high stakes, Mindy was determined to fight to clear her name. Both the prosecution and defense returned to present their cases, as they had during the first trial. Andy's wife, Joni, continued to grieve the loss of her husband and remained determined to prove that Mindy was responsible. At trial, Mindy recounted her traumatic experiences of enduring years of physical abuse at the hands of Andy. She described how he threatened her daily, constantly demeaning and humiliating her for seemingly trivial reasons. Desperate to avoid her father, she tried to limit contact, but living in the same house made that nearly impossible. Even brief encounters often escalated into conflicts and confrontations. The prosecutor's office repeated the arguments they had made during the first hearing. Mindy explained that she had chosen the bathroom to end her life, but she hesitated and was unable to go through with it. She discovered she was pregnant and felt a sense of responsibility for her unborn child. For an hour, she struggled with whether to live or die until she heard her father return home. At that moment, she realized she had lost the chance to return the gun to his room without being discovered. Mindy knew her father would be furious if he found out about her plan. Overcome with fear and emotional distress, she decided to protect herself and her child at all costs. Mindy also explained why she shot her father in the back. She said she had told him to check his answering machine, hoping to distract him while she quietly returned the gun to his room. But as she walked into the kitchen, she saw him begin to turn around and noticed the shotgun. Panicked and believing he was about to lunge at her, she pulled the trigger. The jury heard conflicting accounts. Andy's wife, Joni, and a nearby neighbor claimed there were no signs of a struggle or any screams for help, further suggesting that the killing was premeditated rather than an act of self-defense. At the hearing, an anonymous source revealed that a juror was biased. The juror had traveled from another state, motivated by Mindy's story. As a result, a new hearing was scheduled with a different jury. This time, the defense presented a new witness, Mindy's treating physician, during her first hospitalization for depression and end-life thoughts. The physician confirmed that Mindy was severely depressed and exhibited clear signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. She would flinch at the sound of any noise or footsteps. The psychiatrist supported Mindy's testimony that she had been humiliated and tortured by her father. Under the circumstances, her actions in self-defense seemed understandable, especially as she feared for her life and the safety of her child. Both sides presented strong arguments. However, the prosecutor's office held back a critical move. They introduced their own psychiatrist, who strongly disagreed with the conclusions of Mindy's treating doctor. Mindy faced a significant setback when her brother disputed claims of domestic violence in the home, allegations often made by both her mother and Mindy. Ultimately, after 24 hours of deliberation, the jury found Mindy Bereniite guilty of murdering her father. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Mindy's lawyers were shocked by the outcome, as they had not anticipated such a harsh sentence. The fate of Mindy's child remains unknown. In an earlier interview, Mindy admitted she knew her actions were wrong but insisted that desperation and fear drove her to kill her father, whom she described as a tyrant. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sungnam Kwan Lisowski. Our story today focuses on the Lisowski family. John and his wife Sungnam, along with their two daughters, Victoria and Christine, live in a town called Aurora in the United States. John's job requires frequent international travel, including trips to Korea, as the company's headquarters are in the United States while some factories are located in other countries. During one of these trips to Korea, John met Sungnam Kwan. He quickly fell in love with her and asked her out. After several dates, they decided to get married. They married in 1983 and moved to the United States. Their first daughter, Victoria, was born in 1988, followed by Christine a few years later. Although the family seemed perfect, some people found Sungnam too strict with the children. For a long time, John reassured himself that the strict nature of Asian parenting was normal, attributing it to his wife's cultural background. However, as tensions mounted, he began to realize that something was wrong. Sungnam's expectations of the children were too high, too strict, and sometimes even harsh. John's displeasure did not affect Sungnam much. She continued to impose more rules and insisted on their strict enforcement. Notably, the children were forbidden to discuss their family with anyone outside, even their friends. Meanwhile, Victoria and Christine socialized with friends and occasionally visited their homes. During these visits, they found that their friends' parents treated them much more kindly and warmly than the constant criticism they faced at home. While their friends' mothers would bake with them on the weekends, Victoria and Christine's mother decided on their interests without ever consulting them. Every weekend, she woke Victoria and Christine up at 6 a.m. and forced them to practice the piano, scolding them even if they made the slightest mistake. If they messed up, she would hit their hands. Victoria and Christine were never praised. Even if they played perfectly, there was no encouragement. Eventually, Sungnam had to use a wooden stick to discipline them. If they relaxed for a moment or hunched over, they would be beaten by her. John disagreed with this method of education. However, Sungnam achieved results. Victoria and Christine quickly mastered the piano, began to participate in competitions, and even won awards. However, deep down, they did not find joy in their achievements. Sungnam convinced John that her goal was to raise gifted children and that this harsh approach was necessary. Sungnam had a hot temper and would quickly lose control, leading to dangerous behavior. This created a tense atmosphere in the family, where even John felt uncomfortable around her. Sungnam firmly established her dominance in the family and made all the decisions. She often intervened in conflicts, even when she was not directly involved, relishing the role of judge. This situation took place during a conflict between Christine and Victoria. The two children were arguing about something trivial. Christine quickly apologized, but Victoria, the older sister, did not accept it. This made Sun Nam unable to bear it. Ignoring Victoria and Christine's feelings, Sun Nam became angry. She stood up, walked past Victoria, and began to punish Christine. Christine was confused and did not understand why she was being beaten. Sun Nam hit her so violently that Christine's face was left bloody as she slid down the wall, unable to get up. Victoria watched in horror and began to scream an apology, begging her mother to stop. The beating only ceased when Victoria screamed. Sun Nam then turned to Victoria and warned her that if she disobeyed again, Christine would be punished. She made it clear that she would hurt little Christine every time Victoria defied Sun Nam, ensuring that Victoria would feel guilty about it. Many may wonder why John, the father of the children, did not step in to stop his wife and help his daughters. The truth is that John could not influence his wife, he was also the target of her anger. At the time of this incident, John was working late at the office, trying to avoid the increasingly tense atmosphere at home. This distance made it difficult for him to be involved in his children's lives. By the time John realized that the situation had escalated beyond normal limits, it was too late to intervene. While he was at work, his children were suffering from constant abuse at the hands of their mother. She often assaulted them. John was also involved in a number of disturbing incidents. On one occasion, Victoria went to a friend's house after school. There were obvious injuries on her body, and many suspected that something was wrong in her family, but Victoria remained silent. While she was at her friend's house, the phone rang, and Victoria was called home because something had happened. Victoria braced herself and returned to her house. As she approached, she saw her father standing at the door, talking to the police. He had a large, fresh bruise and a cut on his cheek that looked quite frightening. Victoria overheard her father's conversation with the police. He was making excuses, insisting that he had just fallen and that there was nothing to worry about. However, Victoria understood the truth of the situation. It was clear that after the initial violence, her father had tried to confront his wife to protect the children. Unfortunately, he was severely beaten, and Sun Nam even threatened him with a knife. Since then, she had completely dominated the family. John was too afraid to speak up because he feared for his own safety. Sun Nam's violent outbursts were terrifying. All the family members tried to keep their distance from her. John spent more time at work, trying to stay away from home as much as possible. He built a successful career, becoming the director of a telecommunications equipment company, and often traveled for work. Victoria and Christine followed suit, spending more time at school or with friends to avoid being at home. This situation continued until Victoria and Christine entered high school. During this time, the distance between John and Sun Nam grew. He began working longer hours, taking extra shifts, and often left the house before everyone else woke up. He would wake up early and come home later than everyone else. Unfortunately, Victoria and Christine could not escape this situation. They were still stuck in a stressful environment with their demanding mother. During this time, the cruelty towards Victoria and Christine escalated significantly. One day, an argument broke out between the two sisters. Their mother, Sun Nam, intervened by locking her daughters in a stuffy, dark garage. She forced them to sit with their hands raised for hours. When she finally opened the door, she found Victoria and Christine exhausted from the heat, but Sun Nam chose not to let them out. Instead, she refused to give them water and simply closed the door again. It was later revealed that she had gone to the store, leaving her children in that miserable situation. Victoria and Christine sat for hours in the sweltering heat, feeling miserable but too afraid to go outside, knowing that it would only make their mother angrier. One day, while driving down the street, she lost control of the car, causing Victoria and Christine to bang on the door from the inside. They were confused by their mother's actions. Passers-by noticed her driving erratically, and when they approached, she claimed that the children were late for the bus, justifying her reckless speed. Witnesses described her as unstable, with wild eyes. In addition, Sun Nam flaunted her wealth to make those around her jealous, even though she did not work. All her spending was done with John's money and credit. Sun Nam lost control of her finances to the point that John's steady salary was no longer sufficient. The situation became serious when they faced eviction due to unpaid utility bills and mortgage payments. Despite this threat, Sun Nam had no intention of stopping her spending habits. She continued to buy expensive items and frequented the city's posh clubs. John was unaware of the accumulated debts until it was too late. Sun Nam adopted a reckless lifestyle, spending her evenings at clubs while neglecting her children. When the threat of eviction became a reality, John could no longer bear the situation and made accusations against his wife. This caused her to react violently, leading to heated arguments that eventually escalated into physical violence. She hit John several times, forcing him to retreat to avoid hurting her. Despite his efforts to calm her down, she continued to attack him. In response, he grabbed her arm to restrain her until she calmed down, leaving marks on her wrist. Seeing the situation, Sun Nam decided to call the police. She claimed that her husband was abusing her. She misrepresented the facts, insisting that John had attacked her and that she had to endure constant verbal abuse and violence from him. Sun Nam continued to portray John as abusive and threatening. Finally, Victoria could no longer remain silent and informed the police that her mother had lied. She gave a truthful account of what had happened, as she had witnessed the entire conflict. Victoria explained that her mother had thrown the first punch, and even when John tried to calm her down, Sun Nam continued to act aggressively and threateningly. Faced with these conflicting stories, the police could only leave, suggesting that the family resolve the matter themselves. After the incident, nothing changed. Sun Nam continued to spend the money her husband earned. When John found out about this, he was furious and decided to confront her over the phone. Before the call, he had blocked her access to their accounts. During the conversation, Sun Nam lied and argued. He did not realize the potential consequences of his actions. When Sun Nam discovered that John had blocked her access to all of their accounts, she stormed into his office with a knife, threatened him, and cornered him. Faced with the threat of violence and with his children witnessing the chaos, John felt compelled to unlock the card. After this incident, John threw himself into work, taking more business trips to avoid his wife. To manage the expenses for the children and household bills, he was often away from home. In the fall of 2002, John went on a short business trip to China. During this trip, he met another woman and fell in love with her. John began looking for every opportunity to return to China to be with her and intended to divorce Sun Nam. On September 5, 2002, he emailed Sun Nam to inform her that he wanted a divorce. Although he had been struggling to fulfill his responsibilities as a father, he now wanted to take their children to China to be with his new girlfriend. He had a clear advantage over Sun Nam in that he had a stable income, while she did not. As a result, the ideal life she had tried to portray began to crumble. Sun Nam called John to discuss their personal problems. She was furious after receiving his message, and the news of his decision to divorce shocked her. He confirmed that he intended to initiate divorce proceedings as soon as he returned from his business trip. Sun Nam angrily threw the phone at Victoria, saying that their father wanted to take her and her sister to China. Victoria remained calm, picked up the phone, and told her father that this was a great plan, as living with their mother was unbearable. She expressed her eagerness to leave home and waited for her father to return. Sun Nam was acutely aware of the difficult situation around her. During the Christmas holiday of 2002, John returned from a business trip. At that time, Victoria was 14 years old, and her sister Christine was 12. John was 46 years old, and Sun Nam was 41. While everything seemed to be falling apart, Sun Nam noticed that everyone else was in a good mood. Despite being very angry, Sun Nam did not create any conflicts, which made Victoria and Christine feel uneasy. On the contrary, John appreciated the quiet atmosphere. When John returned from China, Sun Nam had completely changed. She prepared gifts for the whole family, dressed neatly, and decorated the house. She began serving drinks, creating a pleasant atmosphere. Sun Nam placed glasses for everyone and then stepped away to continue washing dishes. Victoria and Christine noticed something white at the bottom of their drinks but did not have time to warn their father before he finished drinking. Realizing that something was wrong, Victoria and Christine pretended to drink but secretly discarded their drinks. When Sun Nam left the room, they noticed that John seemed sluggish after drinking. He said he felt tired and went upstairs to sleep. Although Victoria and Christine had only taken a few sips, they also felt weak. They fell asleep until 8 a.m. the next day, December 25, 2002. Christine and Victoria woke up feeling unwell, not remembering how they had gotten to bed, but at first, there was nothing alarming. Victoria suspected that her mother had put sleeping pills in their drinks, although the reason was unclear. She felt relieved to wake up and find herself alive. Victoria and Christine decided to go downstairs to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. However, before they could leave the room, they heard a loud noise from the first floor that sounded like a gunshot. Earlier that morning, Sun Nam had sneaked into John's office, where he was working. She shot him once in the head from behind and then shot him 3 times in the back. Afterward, she went upstairs and stopped at the door. Victoria and Christine were horrified to see her reloading the gun. Sun Nam begged for forgiveness, saying that she had to do it, then pointed the gun at Victoria. There were 7 bullets left in the magazine. Christine, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly regained her composure. Seizing the moment, she grabbed the phone and called the police. Christine could wait for the operator to answer while Sun Nam reloaded. Christine tried to tell the police that there was a shooting in the house and provided the address. Soon, the police heard a series of gunshots as the call continued. Christine had to run away to escape her mother, who was about to shoot her. She ran into Victoria's bedroom just seconds before her mother opened fire. Christine was injured, but against all odds, both she and Victoria survived. She locked the door and waited for rescue, praying that her mother could not get in. Meanwhile, the patrol officers arrived at the house in emergency mode. Within minutes, they parked outside and heard several gunshots from inside, followed by silence. Unsure of what was happening, the officers cautiously entered the house with their weapons drawn. Inside, they first found John, who had been shot multiple times. Sun Nam shot himself behind a locked door, and she is unconscious. They also discovered Victoria and Christine, wounded but fortunately still alive. All 3 of them were rushed to the hospital. They were seriously injured and needed immediate medical attention. As they began to recover, the police interviewed them to gather information about the shooting. Sun Nam was in worse condition, but Victoria and Christine seemed to have little concern for her. On September 5, 2002, Sun Nam applied for a gun license. It took some time, but by December 17, she had legally obtained a pistol. Over the next week, she practiced target shooting diligently. This preparation suggested that the crime had been planned in advance. Sun Nam confided in her friends about her hatred for her husband and even mentioned her intention to buy a weapon to kill him. However, Her friends considered Sunnam's comments to be expressions of anger and did not believe that she would actually carry out her threat. The attack and Sunnam's parenting made her friends key witnesses for the prosecution. Their testimony shocked both the jury and the experienced police officers. Sunnam was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, which determined that she was fit to stand trial. The prosecution argued that Sunnam had carefully planned the murder and attempted to kill her entire family, proving that she had intent and was of sound mind. Ultimately, Sunnam Kwan Lisowski was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 45 years. Victoria and Christine were sent to live with their aunt and uncle. Throughout her incarceration, Sunnam continued to misbehave and denied all charges against her. In 2008, Sunnam confessed to her actions, saying that she could not accept the idea of divorce and was desperate to keep her husband, who had chosen to be with another woman. She admitted that she had tried to harm her children because she could not bear the thought of a stepmother caring for them. Sadly, in 2008, Sunnam took her own life while in prison. Victoria and Christine wrote to her, hoping for a future reunion, but that day never came. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of John Sweeney. John Sweeney was born on October 13, 1956. He grew up with an older brother and an older sister. People familiar with John's family described his father as a cruel and controlling man. From an early age, John was subjected to his father's strictness and was often the target of physical punishment. Psychologists later identified these harsh experiences as a major factor contributing to John's challenges as an adult. Despite their difficult living environment, John's family was close-knit and working class. His father instilled values of assertiveness and resilience in his sons. However, his methods were harsh, and he may have passed on his authoritarian attitude toward women to John, teaching him that women should always be submissive. Despite these hardships, John developed a strong passion for painting from an early age. At 15, he dreamed of attending art school, but his family did not support his aspirations. Instead, he studied carpentry and specialized in woodworking. This career path left John with a lingering sense of frustration, as he was unable to pursue his true ambitions and was forced to follow a different path in life. John had problems with the police from an early age. As a teenager, he displayed extremely violent tendencies, which led to a number of disturbing incidents. He frequently exhibited aggressive and violent behavior, often targeting his friends. One reported incident involved John getting into a dangerous fight while in high school at a nearby store where he was buying chips. Despite still being a minor, he picked up an axe and swung it aggressively. Witnesses said that, fortunately, no one was injured in the incident. The reckless teenager faced no serious consequences and was only given a warning by the police. By 1974, John had decided to marry. His wife, Anne Bramley, was his neighbor. Together, John and Anne had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Despite Anne's hopes that marriage and family life would calm him down, John remained ruthless, and nothing seemed to change his erratic nature. John's violent outbursts were especially severe when he was drunk. Anne revealed that he often harmed her pets to intimidate her and escalated conflicts by throwing bricks through windows, causing significant property damage. He repeatedly accused her of infidelity, even though she was faithful and gave him no reason to suspect her. Ironically, John himself had no qualms about pursuing romantic relationships with other women. According to family acquaintances, John treated his girlfriends as if they were his property. His first wife, Anne, experienced this firsthand. She described John Sweeney as sweet and charming until his mood changed. When this happened, he would focus on small issues, becoming aggressive and cruel. In these moments, he would easily explode and seem to invent reasons to justify his anger when none existed. After enduring this behavior for 5 years, and decided to file for divorce in 1979. However, like many manipulators, John tried everything to convince her to reconcile. Surprisingly, his efforts worked, and the couple remarried in 1981. During this time, John was able to control his behavior, leading Anne to believe that he had truly changed. Unfortunately, this did not last. Soon after they remarried, John's aggressive and uncontrollable behavior returned, and domestic violence once again became a regular occurrence. Before their relationship ended, they experienced another violent incident. One evening, John got drunk and attacked Anne. This event led her to make a firm decision to leave him and not attempt to mend the relationship. However, true to the behavior of a manipulator, John did not let go easily. Viewing his wife as his possession, John began stalking her. After Anne moved into a new house, an incident occurred while she was visiting a neighbor in the apartment next door. Through the wall, Anne heard suspicious noises coming from her apartment. She suspected it could either be John with malicious intentions or a burglar breaking in. Both possibilities seemed dangerous. Not wanting to take any chances, Anne called the police. When they arrived, the officers escorted her back to her apartment and searched the premises for any threats. Suddenly, John emerged from the closet, holding clothes in one hand and an axe and a knife in the other. He appeared startled to see the police and claimed he had planned to surprise his ex-wife. However, Anne believed he had brought the weapons with the intent to harm her, possibly even to kill her, as she had finally escaped his control. Unsurprisingly, the police did not believe John's story about the surprise and arrested him. However, he was later released without charges because he had not harmed anyone and was technically in his own apartment. The police only secured a verbal promise from him to stay away from Anne. After the divorce was finalized, Anne left with her children, moved away, and went into hiding to escape her dangerous ex-husband. Eventually, John gave up pursuing her. He decided it was time to change his life, leaving the city and embarking on a tour around Europe in hopes of forgetting his troubled past. He began searching for work abroad, believing he could find better opportunities and earn more money. Finding temporary jobs abroad was not difficult for John, but he never stayed in one place for long. He traveled to Germany and France before eventually settling in the Netherlands. Further investigations did not uncover any evidence of assaults on women during these trips. While abroad, John returned to his old habits, searching for a woman he could marry. However, his efforts were unsuccessful, and he was eventually forced to return to his homeland. Interestingly, upon his return, John rediscovered his passion for painting. Experts later analyzed his artwork and attributed its themes to his criminal nature. His paintings were gruesome, often violent and bloody, depicting brutal scenes. However, at the time, they were dismissed as mere works of art. Later, John made a living as a carpenter, taking on repair and construction jobs. He eventually settled in London, where he met Melissa Halstead, a model and photographer. She had hired him to do repairs on a film set. Melissa was an incredibly beautiful woman, and John seemed to take an immediate interest in her. Originally from Ohio, USA, Melissa had moved to another country in Europe, where she felt lonely and had few social connections. She was unaware of John's violent past. John quickly regained his charm, and after visiting her on set a few times, he suggested they meet. This marked the beginning of their romantic relationship. At first, Melissa described their relationship as warm and loving, reflecting John's manipulative behavior. Over time, they began living together. Less than a year later, John attacked her for the first time. Before this, He had repeatedly broken her self-esteem and cheated on her, leaving her feeling completely hopeless. Her career began to suffer, and her family back in Ohio recognized the toxicity of the relationship. Both her mother and sister urged Melissa to leave John as soon as possible. About a year after they met, Melissa's sister visited her in England. While staying at Melissa and John's apartment, she discovered banned substance and some disturbing artwork that John had created. She was shocked by what she saw. Before leaving, Melissa's sister begged her to end the relationship immediately. Despite this, Melissa chose to stay with John. In 1987, John committed his first violent attack on Melissa, which led to legal trouble. He was cautioned twice for his violent behavior. On one occasion, John threw a chair at Melissa, injuring both her legs. On another occasion, he punched her in the face. However, both times he only received verbal warnings and small fines. At the time, British authorities had a lenient attitude towards domestic violence. In the summer of 1988, John decided to move to Austria, and Melissa went with him. Initially, the move seemed to benefit their relationship. They reconnected and experienced a period without violence. During this time, things went well. They both made good money, and Melissa's modeling career began to take off again. She traveled frequently for work, and they could now afford to rent an apartment in central Vienna. However, their relationship soon fell apart. One evening, John's violent nature resurfaced, and he attacked Melissa with a hammer. She was taken to the hospital with a fractured skull. It seems that John harbored resentment towards her and became increasingly obsessed with his art. Psychologists later analyzed his artwork and concluded that it reflected his inner turmoil and violent worldview. Unfortunately, at the time these drawings appeared, no one paid much attention to John who recognized the warning signs. The haunting images clearly showed his desire to kill. While John was in prison, Melissa was recovering from the attack. Despite everything, she no longer resented John and even began to miss him. In February 1989, she appealed to the Austrian legal system, asking the court to pardon John. Under Austrian law, she had the right to do so. Her appeal was successful. Melissa withdrew her statement about the attack, and John was released after serving only 6 months. However, the police ordered John to leave Austria. Despite this, Melissa chose to follow him. They settled in Amsterdam together. In Amsterdam, John and Melissa rented an apartment in the city center, worked, and used a rental car. Their home was located near the train station. In November 1989, Melissa called her family. Since no one was home, she left a voicemail wishing her loved ones well, expressing her love, and saying that she hoped to see them again soon. After the call, she went on a business trip. In the following months, her family tried to contact her, but they were unable to reach her. At that time, cell phones were not available, making communication even more difficult. John also ignored all calls from Melissa's family. After a while, Melissa, exhausted by the constant conflicts and abuse from John, decided to end their relationship. She confided in her colleagues at work, telling them that if anything happened to her, it would be because of John. Soon after, she disappeared and was never seen alive again. On May 3, 1990, a passerby in Rotterdam noticed a suspicious bag floating in a canal. Upon inspection, the bag was found to contain body parts, although the head and hands were missing. The witness immediately alerted the police. The brutal nature of the crime became evident when the body was examined. What shocked the police most was that the victim's spine had been broken in half, and evidence suggested she had been subjected to prolonged torture designed to inflict extreme pain. After the murder, the perpetrator placed the body in a large black bag, which was then dumped in a canal. At the same time, Melissa's family grew increasingly worried, as they had not heard from her for months. A missing person report had been filed in Amsterdam, but since the Rotterdam police did not have access to it, they were unable to identify the victim. With no leads, the investigation was eventually closed. The unidentified remains were buried in a public cemetery in Rotterdam in an unmarked grave, and the police remained unaware of the victim's identity. John, the killer, escaped justice. By 1991, John had returned to London alone. He never told anyone about what had happened to Melissa. Her family suspected that John was involved in her disappearance, but there was no evidence to prove it. As a result, John continued his life without facing any consequences. At a local pub, John met Delia Balmer, a 40-year-old nurse. Their meeting was initially accidental, but John quickly used his charm to make her fall in love with him. Delia, feeling lonely, invited him to move into her house. John seized the opportunity, helping her with the housework and earning her trust. During this time, he worked as a carpenter, earning a good income by creating furniture and home furnishings. However, over time, John's true nature began to reveal itself. After nearly 2 years together, in December 1993, Delia realized the extent of John's temper and cruelty. She finally asked him to leave. Surprisingly, he did not argue and agreed to move out. However, he did not truly leave her life. John continued to frequent the same shops and bars as Delia, making sure they crossed paths often. Wherever she went, John seemed to appear, controlling and pursuing her relentlessly. He even attempted to re-enter her apartment. In May 1994, Delia went on a short trip around Europe with a friend. When she returned, John was furious that he had temporarily lost control of her. He tracked her down, tied her to the bed, and threatened her with a weapon, intensifying her fear. To further intimidate her, John told her a disturbing story about his previous girlfriend, Melissa. He confessed to killing Melissa, sitting with her body in his apartment for 3 days, and then disposing of her remains by dumping them in a canal in another city. Delia realized she was now trapped with a crazed killer. John demanded her complete obedience, warning her that if she did not comply, she would suffer the same fate as Melissa. Delia endured a week of abuse. During this time, she was repeatedly beaten, assaulted, and threatened with a weapon before finally being released in the summer of 1994. In July, Delia sought refuge at a shelter and reported the abuse to the police. She even showed them John Sweeney's disturbing drawings. However, the police dismissed her concerns, calling them a joke and accusing her of exaggeration. In early November, John left the apartment, and Delia took the opportunity to change the locks. When he returned on November 11th and discovered what she had done, he became furious. Despite locking the door, he managed to break in and attack Delia. The next day, Delia fled to the police station again. The officers escorted her back home, but John had disappeared. However, another attack occurred the following day. This time, Delia's neighbors and friends called the police. The officers arrived just in time, as John was inside the apartment with Delia. She ran out to meet the police, crying and terrified. During a search of the apartment, the police discovered a bag in the bathroom that John had brought with him. Inside the bag were rubber gloves, a mask, some rope, and surgical instruments, items that could be used by a murderer. Despite this alarming discovery, the police dismissed its significance. John was arrested and held for a week before being released on the condition that he returned to his parents' home, 300 kilometers away from Delia. This distance was considered safe. But on December 22nd, John violated the terms of his bail by going to Delia's house in the evening. That night, Delia, feeling nervous, used a brick to block the basement door before going downstairs to put her bike away. She kept glancing around cautiously, afraid that John might be nearby. When she turned around, she saw John's familiar face staring at her. Suddenly, he pulled out an axe and swung it at her. She tried to defend herself with a knife, trying to cut his palm. Enraged, John grabbed the knife and attacked her. Delia screamed in pain and desperately used her bike as a shield against his repeated attacks. The commotion attracted the attention of neighbors. A man rushed to help, wielding a baseball bat and confronting John to protect Delia. John struck the neighbor several times before fleeing the scene. Delia was then taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she underwent several emergency operations that ultimately saved her life. The police began pursuing John Sweeney, who had fled. Despite their efforts, he evaded capture and escaped the UK. He remained in hiding for the next 6 years until he returned to the UK in 2000. To avoid detection, he used a false identity. John was highly skilled at altering his appearance, which made it easy for him to avoid detection. He quickly found work on construction sites and often used different fake names to remain unnoticed. After returning to his hometown, he met Paula Fields. Like John's other victims, Paula was lonely and vulnerable. Since they both came from the same area, John was able to establish a relationship with her quickly. Paula had spent most of her life on the streets. It was surprising that John managed to deceive her, as people like Paula, hardened by street life, were often very adept at reading others and recognizing manipulators or abusers. However, John Sweeney was such a skilled manipulator that he succeeded in fooling even someone like her. At first, their relationship seemed calm and romantic, but over time, John began to show signs of dissatisfaction. His frustration escalated into aggression and hostility. In December, John Sweeney committed a brutal crime. He killed Paula, and after handling the body, he placed the parts in separate bags. He disposed of the bags in the London Canal. On February 19, 2001, boys fishing in the canal discovered one of the bags containing Paula's body parts. They immediately contacted the police, who later recovered 5 more bags containing other parts of her remains. Advances in DNA technology helped identify the victim as Paula Fields and revealed a suspicious boyfriend. At the time, John was using an alias. However, further investigation by the police uncovered that her boyfriend's real name was John Sweeney. He was also linked to the murder of Melissa Halstead and was wanted for an attack on Delia Balmer. John became one of Britain's most wanted men. The police eventually tracked John down at a construction site in central London, where he was working. A specialist armed team was deployed to arrest him, as he was known to carry weapons. When apprehended, John did not resist, likely overwhelmed by the presence of heavily armed officers. A subsequent search of his flat uncovered over 300 gruesome works of art and poetry. Some of these artworks contained references to Paula and other victims. John Sweeney was later convicted of the attempted murder of Delia Balmer. On March 5, 2002, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after only 9 years. With good behavior, he could have been released even earlier. Delia was deeply unhappy with this outcome. As the police continued to investigate Paula Fields' death, they faced numerous challenges. It took another 6 years. In 2008, they were finally able to match DNA from an unidentified victim found in a Rotterdam canal to Melissa Halstead. This discovery linked John Sweeney to another murder. Delia's testimony, which included his confession, along with the presence of his DNA on Melissa's remains, played a key role in connecting him to this brutal crime. Melissa's murder had taken place more than 20 years earlier. Her family finally learned the truth and sought justice. Despite the evidentiary challenges, the police decided to use John's artwork as admissible evidence. Several of his drawings referenced Melissa's death long before her body was identified. One drawing even depicted a headstone bearing her name, details that only the killer could have known. Nearly 21 years after Melissa's death and 6 years after Paula's murder, The trial for these cases was held on April 4, 2011. John Sweeney was convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. This ensures that John will spend the rest of his life in prison. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Graziella Monsi. The Monsi family had an 8-year-old daughter named Graziella Monsi, their only child and a long-awaited member of the family. They are businessmen who cater to tourists and have owned a shop for about 10 years where they sell nuts and dried fruits on the street leading to Castel del Monte. Their shop's prime location brought them steady and substantial income. Despite her young age, Graziella often helped her parents with the business, which made the family proud. Since childhood, she had been involved in their work, bringing energy and enthusiasm to the shop. The location was a bustling tourist area with a constant flow of customers, and her help was invaluable during busy times. Her cheerful and active nature left a lasting impression on customers who shopped there. One Saturday, a peak day for tourists, the Monsi family was hard at work, as weekends were typically their busiest. Graziella's grandfather often helped behind the counter during such busy periods, and she eagerly accompanied him to run small errands. That day, a large number of people came to Castel del Monte, keeping her grandfather busy at the stall, unable to step away. By evening, he grew tired and asked Graziella to go to the nearby fountain to fill a bottle with water. She happily agreed and left for the fountain, just a 5-minute walk away. However, her grandfather soon began to worry when she didn't return promptly. Graziella's grandfather comforted himself by thinking she might have met someone she knew and gotten distracted. However, after more than 20 minutes had passed and she still hadn't returned, he realized something was wrong. Worried, he walked to the fountain to check what might have delayed her. He was astonished to find Graziella nowhere to be seen, either on the road or near the fountain. He searched all the nearby streets carefully but couldn't locate her. Her disappearance seemed suspicious. The grandfather went back to the shop, hoping she might have returned through a different route, but she wasn't there. Roughly half an hour after she vanished, he informed her parents. Together, they began calling her friends and acquaintances, hoping someone had seen her. Sadly, no one they contacted had any information. Meanwhile, Monsi's entire family and some close friends gathered at the square near the store and began organizing a search. Less than an hour after Graziella vanished, the adults and teenagers divided into groups to search for her. The commotion caught the attention of passers-by and some tourists, prompting several volunteers to join the search effort. The Monsi family carried a photo of Graziella, asking anyone they encountered if they had seen her. A few people mentioned seeing a girl who looked like her earlier in the afternoon, but nobody knew where she might be or what had happened. The area was typically peaceful and quiet, making it hard to imagine someone attacking a girl in such a bustling location. After searching unsuccessfully for a few hours, the Monsi family reported Graziella missing at the local police station. The police acted quickly, and soon, the Carabinieri were involved in the search. Later, a witness approached an officer with a disturbing claim. He had heard a child's panicked cry coming from the wooded area near Castel del Monte. 2 police officers immediately went to investigate the location. When they arrived at the forest, they saw smoke rising from a fire. At first, they didn't think it was connected to Graziella's disappearance, but they decided to investigate to better understand the situation. Suspecting it might be a forest fire, they approached cautiously. As they got closer, about 10 meters away, they were hit by a distinct and horrifying smell: burnt flesh. Soon, the officers discovered a fire pit in the woods. In the flames, there were dry leaves burning, and underneath was what looked like a human body. To their horror, the body was child-sized, and the clothing matched the description of the dress Graziella had been wearing that day. The police immediately suspected the remains were hers. The fire had completely consumed her body, and she was found deceased. The area was thoroughly searched, but apart from fragments of Graziella's clothing and a lighter, likely used to start the fire, no other evidence was found to identify the perpetrator. Investigators decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of the area and aimed to collect surveillance footage from nearby cameras. A forensic expert later confirmed the grim discovery: the body was indeed Graziella's. An autopsy revealed that she had been deliberately murdered and burned. News of the incident spread quickly, making headlines the next day. Journalists flocked to Graziella's family, seeking comments on the tragic murder. When her relatives learned the full details of what had happened, they were in utter disbelief. They could not comprehend such a cruel and monstrous act. The entire community was deeply shaken. The media heightened public fear by extensively reporting on the horrific crime near the famous castle. This caused a sharp decline in tourist visits to the town, as people began to view the area as unsafe. The town's reputation as a popular destination suffered greatly, dealing a heavy blow to Andria's tourism industry. People are facing the tragedy and its lasting consequences. Meanwhile, investigators acted swiftly to find the perpetrator. From the very beginning, the police were determined to solve the case. Their primary theory was that a predator had enticed Graziella to leave the bustling tourist area and go to a more secluded location. There, he assaulted her and tried to cover up all evidence of the crime. Authorities initially believed that the attacker was likely an older, calculated, and experienced man. They began their investigation by reviewing a list of known criminals in the area who had criminal records related to abuse. However, as the case unfolded, this theory lost credibility. Investigators also considered the possibility that the perpetrator was a tourist who randomly targeted victims, including Graziella. To explore this, they analyzed tourist movements, but this idea also seemed increasingly improbable over time. As police interviewed witnesses, friends, and acquaintances of the Graziella family, one name kept coming up: Pasquale Tortora. He was a 20-year-old local man who worked illegally as a parking attendant on the same street as the Graziella family shop. Many people had noticed that since Graziella started working at the store, Pasquale had been observing her in a strange and unsettling way. Several individuals mentioned this, and their observations raised suspicions. When the police questioned Pasquale's friends, the concerns deepened. Some of his acquaintances had even joked that he seemed attracted to the 8-year-old girl. However, in the current situation, what had once been considered a harmless joke now carried a much darker implication. Could Pasquale have been a predator obsessed with Graziella? His family firmly denied this possibility, pointing out that he was raised in a respectable household and had no prior trouble with the law, at least, not until the tragic evening near Castel del Monte. However, despite his family's claims, Pasquale quickly became the main suspect. Investigators grew more suspicious after meeting with him. His t-shirt showed suspicious dark red stains, and his clothing was marked with dirt, as if he had been crawling or struggling on the ground. Additionally, his face bore small but clear scratches, resembling marks left by tiny hands in a desperate struggle. Pasquale, of course, denied any involvement in the attack on Graziella. However, during questioning by detectives, his testimony became increasingly inconsistent. He kept changing his story, which led investigators to suspect that he was hiding something. After just a few hours at the police station, Pasquale began to crumble under pressure. He then made a cold remark, stating that he found Graziella very beautiful, even though she was only 8 years old. Initially, he claimed that while walking in the woods, he stumbled upon Graziella's lifeless body already on fire. Frightened, he said he ran away, and the police showed up later. Later, he altered his story. He said he had seen Graziella heading to the fountain to fetch water. Since she knew him and trusted him, she wasn't afraid when he approached her. He emphasized that he had always acted calmly around her up to that point. Pasquale then mentioned that a dog had recently given birth to puppies in the nearby forest and claimed he had offered to show them to Graziella. This seemingly harmless excuse was the moment investigators grasped the horrifying reality of what had taken place. After breaking down completely, Pasquale confessed to his actions. He admitted to luring Graziella into the forest and, after committing the crime, setting her on fire to destroy any evidence. However, He denied intending to abuse her. Instead, he claimed his actions were part of a so-called Cato game, which had escalated beyond his control. The media quickly sensationalized the story, amplifying it with rumors and disturbing details. This overwhelming wave of coverage fueled public confusion. The true motive behind the murder remained unclear, as Pasquale's testimony was riddled with contradictions, leaving many questions unanswered. The police uncovered several inconsistencies in his account. His timeline didn't add up, and his explanations lacked credibility. One fact, however, was undeniable: the fire began around 10 p.m., but Graziella had already been missing for nearly 3 hours. So, what happened during that time frame? Later, Pasquale disclosed a chilling detail: he lit the fire after hearing people nearby in the forest. Believing they were searching for Graziella, he panicked and acted out of fear. However, the most horrifying discovery came from forensic experts. They concluded that she was still alive when the fire was set. Investigators continued to intensify their questioning of Pasquale. A troubling question emerged: how had he managed to commit such a horrific act while escaping with only minor injuries? Could he truly have acted alone? This led authorities to consider the possibility of an accomplice or even multiple accomplices, turning the focus of the investigation in a new direction. The police decided to interrogate Pasquale again. Eventually, he agreed to cooperate, admitting that fear had previously stopped him from revealing the entire truth. In his revised statement, Pasquale claimed that he never intended to harm Graziella himself. Instead, he stated that a group of young men, all aged 18 to 20, had coerced him. Pasquale identified 4 individuals: Michele Zagaria, Giuseppe Di Bari, Domenico Margiotta, and Vincenzo Corritella. He alleged that this group was waiting in the forest. According to him, there was no plan to harm or assault Graziella, but he had lost a bet with them. As a result, they pressured him to lure her into the woods. Pasquale recounted that when Graziella arrived in the forest, the 4 young men attacked her. They stopped her from escaping and forced her into silence. When they heard adults searching for her, they panicked. Fearing legal consequences, they decided to get rid of her. However, they didn't have any fuel to start a fire. Growing desperate, they tried to set her clothes on fire but failed. At one point, Graziella regained consciousness and screamed, prompting them to beat her again until she passed out. They tried to start the fire again, this time covering her body with leaves and using a lighter. The flames finally caught. All 4 young men came from respected families and had no history of violent behavior or serious crimes. Those who knew them described them as calm and well-mannered. Only one of them had a criminal record for a minor theft. Despite Pasquale's testimony, the idea that these 4 young men had decided to burn Graziella alive seemed unimaginable. However, once Pasquale provided their names, the police swiftly arrested them. News of their arrest shocked Italy, with the media covering every detail and fueling public outrage. From the beginning, the 4 suspects denied any involvement in Graziella's death. They claimed they had no idea why they were under investigation. Still, detectives remained determined to interrogate them until they uncovered the full truth about what happened that night. Unlike Pasquale, there was no physical evidence connecting the 4 men to the crime. When police searched their homes, nothing incriminating was found. They did acknowledge that Pasquale had an unhealthy obsession with Graziella, but they strongly denied having any part in her murder. Despite lengthy interrogations, none of the suspects admitted to any involvement. With no solid evidence against them, they were released but remained under close surveillance as the primary suspects. In a chilling development, the same 4 young men were later seen carrying Graziella's coffin at her funeral. Pasquale revealed that they were crying, appearing to be deeply affected by the loss. While detained, the young men claimed they were devastated because they recognized the young girl, often seeing her in the Monsi family's shop, even though they never spoke to her. The police suspected that their presence at the funeral was not coincidental. Although their connection to Graziella's family was minimal, they might have been burdened by guilt and sought some form of redemption. Alternatively, They might have been attempting to monitor the investigation into their possible involvement in the crime. During the next round of interrogations, the suspects were questioned separately. Vincenzo and Giuseppe claimed they had an alibi, supported by the testimony of young Luda. They stated that they had been at the city's gaming club on the day Graziella disappeared. Meanwhile, Michelle and Domenico refused to cooperate with the investigation, declined to answer questions, and demanded lawyers, which only heightened police suspicion. The detectives proceeded to verify Vincenzo and Giuseppe's alibi by visiting the gaming club. While their presence at the club was confirmed, they left after about an hour and were unable to account for their whereabouts afterward. As a result, investigators couldn't rule out their involvement in Graziella's torture. Unexpectedly, Michelle and Domenico confessed to the crime, largely corroborating Pasquale's account. According to their confession, the group invited them to the forest that evening, saying they wanted to play with fire. When Michelle and Domenico arrived, the others were already present. Pasquale was assigned to lure a victim and chose Graziella, a girl who, according to their friends, made him feel uneasy but seemed like an easy target. Pasquale later confirmed that he had discovered Graziella by the fountain while she was fetching water. He lured her by inviting her to see puppies that had recently been born in the nearby forest. Graziella, trusting and unsuspecting, did not imagine that this could lead to harm and agreed out of curiosity. Pasquale deceived and coaxed Graziella into following him. Since Graziella loved animals, she was eager to see the puppies, especially because Pasquale was someone she knew and trusted. She never expected such a cruel betrayal. The wooded area where the ambush was planned was nearby, about a 15 to 20-minute walk from where he first approached her. By then, her grandfather would have already begun searching for her. When they reached the location, Michelle, Giuseppe, Domenico, and Vincenzo jumped out from their hiding spots. Graziella was terrified. In that moment, she likely realized she had been trapped, but it was too late. She had no way to defend herself. While mildly intoxicated, the perpetrators continued drinking and seemed to take amusement in Graziella's fear. According to their later confessions, they claimed they didn't plan to assault her but merely wanted to torment and mock her, taking advantage of her vulnerability. Graziella was so frightened that she went into a state of shock. During the incident, their group accidentally caused Graziella to fall and hit her head against a stone. Initially, the group claimed they did not plan to imprison her. Their intention was to restrain her to scare her further, but she collapsed and lost consciousness. Believing she was dead, they panicked, fearing that she was already being searched for. Likely due to alcohol intoxication clouding their judgment, they decided to destroy all evidence of what had occurred. They thought setting a fire would accomplish this. Some claims by the suspects were partially supported by evidence. For instance, the forensic examination did not conclusively reveal any signs of abuse. Graziella was discovered wearing underwear. The condition of the remains was poor due to severe burns, which made it impossible to confirm or rule out abuse. The Carabinieri suspected that fire might have destroyed evidence, as hoped by the group. At the time, Michelle, Giuseppe, Domenico, and Vincenzo continued to insist that the incident had been accidental. The court finally decided the fate of the juvenile offenders. Vincenzo and Giuseppe confessed that they had gone to the forest because Pasquale invited them, unaware of what playing with fire meant. They claimed they were unwittingly drawn into something far more sinister. According to their testimony, they were horrified by what transpired and quickly left, not wanting to remain at the scene. However, they failed to realize that this dangerous situation would ultimately lead to police intervention. Their actions were driven by fear, either of the other participants or of the legal consequences they could face if accused of taking part. Despite inconsistencies in the group's accounts, the trial concluded with Pasquale Tortora receiving the lightest sentence, 30 years in prison. This was due to two key factors. First, he was the only member who cooperated voluntarily with the investigation. Second, despite extensive tests conducted by investigators, the evidence consistently showed that Pasquale was not the one who set Graziella's body on fire, although he actively participated in the abuse. Investigators concluded that the four criminals, Michelle, Giuseppe, Domenico, and Vincenzo, were responsible for dumping the body, and they imposed severe punishment on them. Convicted of kidnapping, child abuse, and premeditated murder, they received life sentences in solitary confinement. This meant they would remain in prison for the rest of their lives without interaction with other inmates. During the reading of the verdict, Graziella's mother fainted and had to be assisted by her husband. At the same time, tensions erupted among the defendants' families, resulting in arguments. Graziella's relatives expressed satisfaction with the sentences, believing them to be justified, except in the case of Pasquale, who they felt had been punished too lightly for luring their child into the woods and sealing her tragic fate. The court's severe ruling angered Vincenzo and Giuseppe, both of whom maintained their innocence adamantly. Their fervent claims gained them some supporters who believed their protestations, but this did not lead to a successful appeal. 8 years later, Vincenzo Corratella, 27, ended his life, possibly out of despair or guilt over his actions. While in prison, he discreetly brought a rope cord into his cell and used it to end his life. Just days prior, his mother had visited him and continued to firmly believe in his innocence. However, he had already lost hope. On June 19, 2013, Michelle's lawyer requested a retrial, citing alleged judicial errors in opposing the verdict. The court, however, denied the request. Pasquale's mother publicly apologized to the Monsi family for her son's actions, expressing her belief that he should fully face the consequences of his crime. Despite this, Graziella's mother rejected the apology. She responded firmly, stating that Pasquale should experience the same pain their daughter had endured. She held the belief that if he had not led Graziella into the forest, their daughter would still be alive. As a result, Graziella's parents primarily blamed Pasquale for their loss. Graziella Monsi's name remains etched in memory across Italy. Near Castel del Monte, a small tombstone commemorates her, featuring her name, photograph, and a brief account of her tragically short life. Locals and tourists often leave flowers and toys at the site, though it is most frequently visited by Graziella's close family and friends. 24 years after the tragedy, Pasquale Tortora was released from prison. His original sentence was reduced by 6 years due to good behavior. Now 44 years old, he is attempting to rebuild his life, though it is uncertain whether he will succeed. Among the group involved in the crime, Pasquale was the only one tried through an abbreviated process, which led to a lighter punishment. Following the incident, the boys who were involved severed ties with each other. Their relationships remained fractured, even after Pasquale's release. He has expressed deep regret, stating that not a day passes without him reflecting on the harm he caused to Graziella and her family. Pasquale admits that, if given the chance to turn back time, he would never have committed the crime. Throughout his ordeal, his family provided crucial support, helping him endure that dark period and rebuild his life, a kindness for which he remains deeply grateful. Dasha, Graziella's mother, strongly objected to Pasquale's early release, claiming that it weakened the integrity of the law. She believes that individuals like him remain dangerous to society, are incapable of change, and should not be given second chances. Vincenzo and Giuseppe, both maintaining their innocence, questioned why Pasquale acted as he did. Vincenzo tragically died, leaving behind a suicide note in which he insisted on his innocence and expressed anger at the injustice he had endured. He entrusted evidence to a trusted person to support his claims in the future but lost the will to continue fighting for his freedom. Giuseppe, Domenico, and Michelle remain isolated. Giuseppe continues to proclaim his innocence, spending his days reading the Bible. He has accepted his sentence and is not pursuing an appeal but firmly believes he will eventually be released when his complete lack of involvement in the murder is proven. His lawyer and family share this belief, as did the late Vincenzo. All three insist that Pasquale masterminded the tragedy. They assert that he lured Graziella into the forest, tortured her, and was solely responsible for the crime. Their claims are backed by evidence. Only Pasquale's body showed signs of a struggle, such as scratches inflicted by Graziella. His clothes had dirt and her blood on them, while the others had no such traces. Despite this, Pasquale received the lightest sentence and has been released. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Troy LaFerrara. In 1994, in the tiny town of North Pole, Alaska, USA, Miranda was born. She had an older sister named Ashley, and both girls were raised by their mother, Elizabeth, a single parent. From the very beginning, their lives were not easy. At the age of 2, Miranda was diagnosed with congenital hip dysplasia. Because of this, from an early age she began to wear a special corrector so that she could be mobile naturally. It was difficult for her. Miranda was often perceived as an outcast with her mother. Everything was going badly. Elizabeth had problems with work. During this tough time, her brother-in-law, Richard, became a source of support. He was a serviceman and seemed like a decent person. He frequently visited her home, and he sometimes even looked after the children. However, as it later turned out, his intentions were much darker. When Miranda and Ashley turned 5 and 6 years old, respectively, Richard abused the girls. He convinced them not to tell anyone about what had happened. Only a few years later, the eldest daughter found the strength to overcome her fear and speak about the abuse. It was then that Elizabeth reported the matter to the police. When officers came to search Richard's house, they found a diary detailing all the abuse he had inflicted on the girls. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison but was released after just 6 years for good behavior. This was his first criminal offense, which contributed to his early release. By the time Miranda and Ashley turned 9 and 10 years old, respectively, they were grappling with the psychological trauma inflicted by Richard. When Elizabeth and her children learned that he would be released, it was a tremendous shock. They decided to move to another city. During this period, their situation worsened. Financial difficulties increased, and they felt betrayed by someone they had trusted. All of this became a significant burden. In their hometown, there was nothing that held them back. Living in proximity to such a threat was unbearable. Miranda hoped for a fresh start with the move, but it did not help her cope with the psychological trauma she had endured. By the age of 12, she began to exhibit rebellious behavior, associating with a group of older, dysfunctional teenagers. They engaged in substance abuse and excessive drinking. In her quest to fit in with this group, Miranda also began to indulge in these harmful behaviors. During this period, she met a man who was 24 years old at the time and had a bad reputation. Unfortunately, Miranda seemed to have always attracted such trouble. She became part of a group of teenagers with unconventional interests. They referred to themselves as a satanic group. Most people considered them gloomy and dangerous. Although Miranda wasn't an official member, she clearly participated in activities because of him, who persuaded her to join in some rituals, after which her soul seemingly belonged to him. When Miranda finally told her mother about what had happened, Elizabeth tried to sever all her daughter's ties with this unhealthy group. Unfortunately, this did not help. She began to run away frequently, developed an addiction to hard substances, and her school performance deteriorated significantly, as did her relationships with classmates. She became very aggressive and often instigated fights. The situation continued to worsen, and Elizabeth struggled with similar addictions. Miranda's biological father intervened. As far as is known, this was the only significant impact he had on her life. At his insistence, Miranda was placed in a clinic where she received help to combat the consequences of her experiences. She was prescribed medications and diagnosed with mental disorders. Unfortunately, this was of little help. According to people who were well acquainted with the dysfunctional family, by the age of 16, Miranda decided to drop out of school. At the same time, she immersed herself in wild parties with her troubled peers. She began a series of relationships with older men, one of whom got her pregnant. Although Miranda decided to keep the child, she didn't even know who the biological father was. After that, Elizabeth asked her to terminate the pregnancy. Meanwhile, relations with her family deteriorated to an extreme point. Ashley could no longer watch her mother and sister turn into addicts. She felt forced to leave home, resulting in Miranda losing her only support. By this time, after Elizabeth's overdose, social services decided to take Miranda away from Elizabeth. She is destined to be in a new family in a small town called Dan in North Carolina. It was here that Miranda met a 20-year-old man named Alit Barber. By this time, Miranda was 17, and Alit was engaged to a girl who was expecting a child with him. This girl later turned out to be another underage student. A love triangle formed around Alit, who had 2 pregnant girls at once. The children were born about a month and a half apart. Now, the group had 2 newborns that needed care. However, all of them are not mature enough to take on the responsibilities of being parents. A few months after the children's birth, Alit's own daughter was hospitalized due to an overdose of sedatives. The behavior of the biological father had always been problematic, and from that moment, it only deteriorated further. His relationship with his fiancée began to suffer, and she ultimately decided to break up with him, leaving with the child for another city. This led to Alit and Miranda being together, forming a full-fledged couple, raising little Aria together. During this time, Miranda willingly talked about her difficult past, and Alit became intrigued as they discussed her experiences with the satanic cult. About a year into their relationship, they decided to leave North Carolina, as their families did not approve of their lifestyle. This escape was necessary to distance themselves from constant conflicts and the supervision of the older generation. Thus, a series of moves began for the young family. They struggled to settle down anywhere for long due to employment difficulties, until they finally reached a suburb in Pennsylvania called Port Trevorton, where only about 400 people lived at that time. They had neither money nor work to establish a foothold. However, Alit had a friend in the area who helped them by providing a place to stay. They were essentially marginalized individuals, making it challenging for them to find regular employment, as they were quite unsociable, which led to difficulties with social interactions. On October 22, Miranda, in her search for income, decided to offer herself as an escort service. She emphasized in her advertisement that she was not willing to provide intimate services but was available for companionship and to accompany men to various events. Outwardly, she seemed quite pleasant, and she met several men for $80, engaging in conversations but without intimate contact. It is difficult to say for sure whether she truly adhered to the boundaries she set. In one such encounter, she met a man named Troy LaFerrara, a 42-year-old married man who had been a decent family man and church member for decades. Upon seeing Miranda's advertisement, he became immediately interested. When he called Miranda, he offered a different type of service, not just companionship, which angered her. She refused his proposal, pointing out what she had written in her ad. After some time, however, disturbing thoughts began to plague her mind. Miranda and Alit realized they were dealing with a rather wealthy man since he had made a very generous financial offer. After discussing it, they recognized that this could be a potential way to alleviate their financial struggles. Although they had not previously fantasized about such desires, the allure of crime as a solution to their financial difficulties excited both Alit and Miranda greatly. At the beginning of their relationship, Alit and Miranda immediately developed a common interest in satanic themes. Their conversations were often filled with dark imagery, including mentions of blood. They did not plan to kill a specific person, however, they would often end such discussions with thoughts of finding a victim and experiencing what it was like to take a person's life. When Troy made his generous offer, Miranda calmed down after the unsettling proposal and began discussing the situation with Alit. Troy lived in another city, and their correspondence took place via the internet, which could easily be deleted along with the removal of profiles. They were not connected in any way in real life, making him an ideal target for murder. They realized they could make good money and fulfill their long-standing dream. A couple of hours later, Miranda agreed to Troy's offer and messaged for him. They agreed to meet in a parking lot of a supermarket on the outskirts of the city, where Miranda would be in her car. Miranda suggested going to a neighboring suburb, claiming it was her summer house that she used for work. Naturally, she did not take the initiative alone. Her boyfriend was supposed to be in the back seat of the car to help her bring her dark fantasy to life. Their plan involved disguising tools and a blanket in the car. The plan stipulated that Miranda would say a code phrase, after which Alit would attack the victim. The meeting was scheduled for November 11, 2013, a date chosen deliberately because it turned out to be Alit's birthday. At the appointed hour, the Honda CR-V was waiting for Troy in the shopping center parking lot. Upon entering the vehicle, he immediately paid Miranda the agreed amount. They drove to a neighboring town, also small and provincial. However, instead of taking him to the house they had discussed, Miranda drove to a secluded spot on a quiet, deserted street in a forested area. She stopped the car and said the code phrase, after which Alit began to strangle Troy with a wire. However, they underestimated their victim's strength. Troy turned out to be quite a powerful man, managing to open the door and even pull one leg out onto the street. Alit quickly weakened. Miranda grew nervous because everything was supposed to have ended long ago, yet it did not go according to plan. They did not expect such resistance. The worst part was that Miranda saw headlights approaching in the rearview mirror, which made her realize they could be caught. She took out the knives they had prepared for a bloody massacre, began to stab Troy multiple times in the chest, neck, face, and stomach. When Troy stopped struggling, ceased showing signs of life, Alit got out of the car, put his leg inside, and closed the door from the outside. He then resumed his position in the back seat, and they fled the scene. They drove to another isolated area in the suburbs, where they stripped Troy of his wallet, expensive watch, jewelry, and anything else they could find, except for his mobile phone. Alit insisted they leave the phone behind, fearing they could be tracked by geolocation. They disposed of Troy's body by the side of the road and drove away, convinced they had committed the perfect crime. Miranda and Alit stopped at the nearest Walmart to purchase cleaning agents to tidy up the car interior. They bought special compounds for the seats and mats, as well as a set of gloves for their cleaning efforts. The front of the car was covered in blood, and cleaning it thoroughly took them several hours. They went to another secluded location to wash away the blood. Afterward, they decided to celebrate Alit's birthday. They went to a restaurant and then to a strip club, using the money stolen from their victim. Alit and Miranda simply continued living their lives as if nothing had happened. The next day, a couple of random witnesses stumbled upon Troy's body, which was not even covered with branches or dirt. The man had been carelessly discarded like trash, with 20 stab wounds and marks of strangulation on his neck. Naturally, witnesses immediately called the police. When law enforcement arrived, they discovered not only the body but also the cord from the electrical device used for strangulation. The body was identifiable because a mobile phone remained in the victim's pocket. The police checked the call history and found that on November 11th, he had contacted only 2 numbers, his wife and 1 unsaved number. After investigating the unsaved number, the police traced it back to Miranda and obtained her details, including her residence. She immediately piqued the investigators' interest. Within minutes, the police were on their way to her house. Miranda was detained and taken to the station for questioning. From the very beginning, the story unfolded. Miranda denied any involvement in the crime and claimed not to know the victim. Nevertheless, it was obvious that she was nervous and acting suspiciously. It was enough for the detectives to ask for her mobile phone for her testimony to begin to change. At first, she vehemently refused to provide her mobile phone, but as the detectives examined the contents of her correspondence and contacts, Miranda grew more and more anxious. Despite their efforts, they were unable to find the necessary information immediately. Miranda had nothing to present, and so they simply let her go. When Miranda returned home, something changed within her. She began to confide in the first person she met, her friend, about the murder. However, she did this so abruptly that it seemed awkward from the very start. The young man tried to convince Miranda that she should return to the police and confess everything. Her husband, Alit, joined the conversation and acted shocked by the story. Miranda clearly felt remorse. She confessed to her friend that she had stabbed the victim with a knife, but she did not mention Alit at all. Throughout the conversation, her husband never confessed to even being present in the car. Even the friend got the impression that he was manipulating Miranda, trying to impose a greater sense of guilt on her, which seemed strange. Instead of taking any part of the blame, Alit feigned shock and even began to cry. The friend did not suspect Alit could be involved in the crime. On the contrary, he believed Alit to be innocent. Miranda struggled with her thoughts most of the night. Finally, around 4 a.m., she gathered her strength and returned to the police station, where she recounted the murder, insisting that it had been self-defense. She confessed that she had agreed to meet Troy but not to provide intimate services. She had only intended to escort him. However, when Troy insisted on paying for intimate, Miranda informed him that she was only 16, which seemed to unsettle him. She claimed he would face criminal prosecution if she reported him to the police. This was a lie, as she had just turned 19. Miranda was clearly trying to shift some of the blame onto the victim to justify her actions. According to her, instead of backing off, Troy began to force her to have intimate. When he realized she was not going to comply, he became aggressive, and she felt that her life was threatened. Recalling her childhood experiences with her Uncle Richard, she claimed to have defended herself. However, Miranda's words sounded implausible. The 20 stab wounds she inflicted, which did not resemble defensive wounds. Moreover, a cord was found with which Troy had been strangled, leaving a mark on his neck that contradicted Miranda's account. It appeared that a third party had been involved. To verify her claims, the police began tracking movements before the meeting. They quickly found surveillance footage filmed in the parking lot just 5 minutes before the scheduled encounter. The recording showed an unknown young man hiding in the back seat of the car, who was soon identified as 22-year-old Alit, Miranda's husband. It was decided to question him. The criminals clearly had not thought through their plan, as they lacked a coherent version of events. As a result, Alit provided a version that was completely different from Miranda's account. Detectives immediately noted that while Miranda was very emotional, Alit showed no feelings. He was cold but surprisingly quick to talk, as if he had long wanted to discuss the crime. While describing the attack, Alit spent much more time discussing the purchases made with the stolen money, including a detailed account of the food they had eaten on his birthday. His lack of concern about the murder was unsettling. After this, Alit and Miranda were arrested and remained in custody until the hearing. However, by that day, both had retracted their statements, now claiming their innocence. This contradicted what Miranda had said during a television interview shortly before the hearing began, where several journalists had spoken to her. Miranda participated in a viral interview, stating that this was not her first experience with such circumstances, and claimed she had stopped counting the victims after reaching the 22nd murder from 2008 to 2013. However, all this seemed absurd. The family spoke out in defense of Miranda, and everyone who knew her well insisted that she had lied her entire life. The reasons for her actions were always the same. Miranda just wanted to draw attention to herself and enjoyed it. Despite this, she insisted that all the murders began when she became a member of a Satanist group in her teens. Miranda avoided details and did not even know the names of the victims, yet she persistently called herself a serial killer. She claimed that her group only killed those who committed bad deeds, for which she was nicknamed Dextrin. During her conversations, she was unable to provide details about these episodes, of which she claimed there were many more. She mentioned living in Alaska during this period, where there were reportedly many missing people. It seemed that all this was a blatant lie. Additionally, her behavior clearly did not align with that of an experienced criminal. She even left the victim's mobile phone right in his pocket without hiding or destroying it. Troy LaFerrara was actually the first victim. During the investigation, it turned out that 2 more men had responded to Miranda's ad, but they did not come, thus saving their lives. However, there were opposing opinions. Psychologists worked extensively with her, and some were convinced that she had killed people before. She frequently talked about her life, including all these alleged ritual murders, and recounting these stories was one of her favorite activities during their relationship. She spoke eloquently about these stories, although she refused to repeat them to journalists, claiming it was to protect the other participants in the murders. Her friends thought she was possessed, while others in the prosecutor's office believed the criminals were trying to avoid the death penalty by claiming insanity. All this was very difficult to prove or disprove, given the numerous statements from the detainees. Before the hearing began in 2016, everything was still uncertain. However, other upheavals occurred. The mother of Miranda voluntarily took her own life. She could not cope with the public pressure of being accused of raising a monster. By that time, she had been struggling with addiction and mental health issues for many years, and her relatives believed she simply could not manage them. She did not leave a suicide note, so it is not known for certain how much influence her daughter had on this decision. Many believe that the public pressure surrounding Miranda was the last straw. That same year, while in prison, Miranda asked for a divorce from her husband. She continued to insist that she was a victim from the day she was born, claiming she was surrounded by manipulators, liars, and criminals. One day, she recounted how she was tied to a bed and had an abortion at home. This happened after she told her mother she was pregnant but did not know by whom. Her ex-boyfriend allegedly forced her into prostitution from the age of 12. However, it is difficult to determine which, if any, of these claims were true. Despite being diagnosed with several abnormalities in the hospital, it remains uncertain whether she ever took medication for conditions such as attention deficit disorder, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder. Feeling the attention and interest of the public, Miranda continued to spin one tale after another. Now she remembered the name of a boy, whom she claimed was killed in another ritual. She then stated that she voluntarily went to the police because she wanted to be arrested to finally stop killing. Elit and Miranda were found guilty. However, there were difficulties in determining the punishment due to their young age. The prosecutor's office fought in vain for the death penalty but was unsuccessful, largely due to organizations advocating for the abolition of the death penalty. As a result, in September 2014, they were sentenced to life imprisonment. Aria fell under the jurisdiction of Child Protective Services. Given how public the scandal was, the little girl's name was changed, and she was placed in a foster family. Most of all, the murders shocked Troy LaFerrara's wife. She had no idea her husband was living a double life, and she was even more shocked by the tragic ending. The case of Troy LaFerrara stands as a somber testament to the destructive power of unresolved trauma, the allure of darkness, and the fragility of human lives caught in the crosshairs of desperation and choice. This narrative is more than a recounting of a crime. It is a profound exploration of how personal pain, toxic relationships, and societal neglect can coalesce into an act of irreversible violence, leaving a trail of devastation that echoes far beyond its immediate victims. Miranda's journey from a vulnerable child to a convicted killer is a harrowing descent marked by pivotal moments of suffering and rebellion. Diagnosed with a physical disability at age 2, her early years were shaped by the struggle for mobility and the isolation it bred. The abuse she and Ashley endured at 5 and 6, respectively, from Richard, a trusted family figure whose dark intentions were later exposed in his diary, planted seeds of trauma that would grow unchecked. Troy LaFerrara, a church-going husband and father, entered this story as an unlikely victim, drawn by Miranda's online ad for companionship in October 2013. His offer of payment for more than she advertised sparked a plan born of financial need and dark fantasy. This was not a crime of passion but a calculated act, driven by greed and a perverse desire to experience murder, rooted in the satanic themes that had long captivated their conversations. The story of Troy LaFerrara is a mirror to society's failures and humanity's capacity for darkness, a call to confront the roots of violence, trauma, isolation, and the allure of destructive bonds, while mourning the lives it claims. For Miranda, it is a life sentence that began long before prison, a confinement rooted in a childhood stolen by abuse and an adulthood lost to her own choices. For Elit, it is the end of a path paved by recklessness and a chilling lack of remorse. For the rest of us, it is a plea to see the unseen, to intervene before despair turns deadly, and to honor the sanctity of every life, however flawed, that crosses our path. In the quiet of Port Trevorton, Troy's memory endures as a silent witness to a tragedy that need not have been, a life extinguished by two souls who chose darkness over light, leaving only questions and sorrow in their wake. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jasmine Pace. Jasmine Pace, a 22-year-old college student, planned to spend Thanksgiving 2022 with her family. However, her plans suddenly changed, leaving her mother surprised. At the last moment, she sent a message canceling the family gathering. Shortly afterward, a new post appeared on Jasmine's Facebook page that read, "Enjoy Thanksgiving with my baby," accompanied by a photo that raised concerns. Initially confused, her family's concern quickly escalated into panic when they realized something was wrong. Jasmine was missing, and someone seemed to be impersonating her online. On the night of November 22, 2022, Jasmine drove a white Chevy Equinox away from her home in Chattanooga, Tennessee, at approximately 11:30 p.m. Later, her mother, Katrina Bean, received a text from Jasmine's phone stating that she would spend the rest of the week at her friend Emma's house. Since Jasmine was grieving the recent loss of her grandmother to cancer, her decision to skip the family gathering didn't immediately alarm her loved ones. She often withdrew for short periods to cope with her emotions. But everything took a troubling turn when Jasmine made a Facebook post. The post featured Jasmine in an uncharacteristically revealing outfit, which surprised her mother. What alarmed her father, Travis Pace, was even more troubling. Jasmine's extensive tattoos were missing from the photo. Each tattoo represented a timeline in her life, added months apart, creating a distinctive pattern, especially on her right arm. The glaring absence of these tattoos confirmed the post was fake, and Jasmine's family realized the situation was far worse than they had imagined. Katrina reached out to Jasmine's friend Emma and confirmed what she had suspected. Jasmine had been missing from her family for a week, contradicting the claims in a recent message. Several other friends and family members had also received suspicious messages supposedly from Jasmine, all of which raised concerns. The family immediately began searching for her. Jasmine's SUV, equipped with a GPS feature from the My Chevrolet app, allowed her mother to track its location. The car was found parked outside a building on Mountain Creek Road in Chattanooga. By the time it was discovered, it was 8:30 p.m. on November 26th, 4 days after Jasmine was last seen leaving her mother's house late on the evening of the 22nd. The area where the car was located was unfamiliar to the family, and as far as they knew, Jasmine didn't know anyone there. When they approached the car, they noticed that the driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that someone much taller than the petite Jasmine had been driving. The family contacted the police, who arrived on the scene and filed a report describing the situation. Katrina also reached out to the family's cell phone provider. Since Jasmine was part of their family plan, her mother, Katrina, had access to her phone records. The records revealed that there had been no calls from Jasmine's phone for several days. In the presence of the police, Katrina began calling the numbers listed in the call log. One number stood out, a call with someone Jasmine had spoken to for over an hour on the night of the 22nd. When Katrina dialed that number, it connected to a young man named Jason, whom Jasmine had recently met on a dating app. Jason, a computer science student at a university in Chattanooga, had been casually dating Jasmine for a few months. Their relationship was not serious, so Jasmine never introduced him to her parents, Katrina and Travis, who didn't know him. When Jasmine was reported missing, Jason claimed he hadn't heard from her in several days and that their last conversation had been brief. However, Katrina found his behavior suspicious and felt he might be lying. His apparent lack of concern further alarmed her. Despite Katrina urging the police to dig deeper, they refused, arguing that Jasmine was an adult and there was no clear evidence of foul play. Determined to find their daughter, Katrina and Travis began knocking on doors throughout the apartment complex on Mountain Creek Road. Unfortunately, No neighbors had seen Jasmine. They sought help from the apartment guard, who provided security camera footage. The video showed a white Chevrolet entering the parking lot. By cross-referencing this footage with timestamps from the My Chevrolet app, they pinpointed the general time frame but couldn't identify the driver. Katrina then noticed an unread text message from Jasmine, sent on November 23rd. The message included a location and timestamp, showing Jasmine's device had been at a specific place at 2:18 a.m. This was highly unusual, as Jasmine had never sent such cryptic messages, especially during the night. Acting quickly, Katrina and Travis went straight to the address mentioned in the message. Jasmine's parents, Katrina and Travis, knocked on every door in the building, paying particular attention to room 210. Neighbors mentioned hearing a loud noise from that unit around 2:15 a.m. on November 23rd. Upon investigation, Katrina and Travis quickly discovered that the tenant of the apartment was Jason. The unit was quite small, consisting of a kitchenette near the sofa, a hallway leading to the bedroom, and a single bathroom. From the front door, they could see a small duffel bag filled with cleaning supplies sitting on the kitchen table. While searching, Travis found Jasmine's driver's license and credit cards in a drawer. They called the police again, but after speaking with Katrina and the neighbors, the officers left, citing a lack of immediate evidence of foul play. Frustrated by the lack of action, Katrina went back to the apartment several times over the next few hours. She collected items like laptops, electronics, cell phones, a camera, and an iPad, anything that might offer clues to her daughter's whereabouts. She and Travis also searched the trash cans outside the building. Nearly at midnight, the police finally returned to room 210 with a search warrant and officially began their investigation. During the inspection, they observed suspicious stains resembling blood in multiple areas, on the wooden floor in the living room, the linoleum in the bathroom, and the carpet in the bedroom. They also discovered blood stains on the bathroom doors and walls. The substantial amount of cleaning supplies found in the apartment further heightened suspicions. At the scene, police seized a pair of white sneakers and blue pants for further investigation. In the living room, broken glass fragments hinted at a possible violent altercation. In the bedroom, the furniture appeared to have been moved, suggesting attempts to conceal signs of a struggle. This discovery led investigators to focus more intently on piecing together the unsettling clues surrounding Jasmine's disappearance. In some parts of the apartment, it was evident that furniture had been rearranged to hide evidence. A kitchen knife was found on the bed, and stains that could potentially be blood were present in nearly every room. A forensic team was brought in to apply a specialized solution designed to detect traces of blood. The investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. Detectives obtained CCTV footage from the apartment building and nearby areas to construct a timeline of Jason Chen's movements, hoping it would lead to locating Jasmine Pace. Investigators confirmed that Jasmine arrived at 110 Tremont before midnight on November 22. Her Chevrolet was seen entering the building's parking lot and later leaving, with investigators tracking the vehicle to the apartment complex where Jason lived. The day after her arrival, Jasmine was recorded leaving the building, wearing a hoodie. A surveillance camera at the apartment's entrance captured Jason leaving multiple times, including at 7:30 p.m. Just 3 minutes later, someone in a light-colored sweatshirt was seen driving Jasmine's SUV to the Signal View condo, where the vehicle was abandoned. On November 23, 2022, Jason took several suspicious trips. In the morning, he went to Walmart and purchased hydrogen peroxide, cleaning supplies, and a pair of white sneakers, which were clearly visible on the store's surveillance footage. These sneakers were later found discarded in a trash can near the apartment complex. That evening, Jason visited Ugreen to buy a pack of paper towels. Between the Walmart trip and disposing of some clothes, investigators believe Jason was attempting to conceal evidence. His movements were monitored through various surveillance videos across Chattanooga, where his distinctive white sweatshirt made him easily identifiable even in blurry footage. Around 6 p.m. on the 23rd, a man in a white sweatshirt was filmed struggling to move a large suitcase from the apartment entrance to the parking lot. Shortly afterward, Jason's black Toyota Camry was seen driving away. On November 29th, a week after Jasmine's disappearance, Jason was found at his parents' home. The arresting officers in Nolanville observed cuts on Jason's arms and legs, suggesting a violent encounter. A search warrant was issued for the home, resulting in the seizure of a black backpack and handwritten notes from the room Jason had been staying in. The notes appeared to show him trying to construct his version of the incident. Detectives discovered Jason had last seen Jasmine on November 19th, according to notes he made. He claimed they had spoken and mentioned that Jasmine struggled with mental health issues. Jason seemingly prepared for his eventual questioning by portraying Jasmine as homeless. During a search of Jason's backpack, detectives found his phone and a SIM card removed from Jasmine's phone. Upon examining Jason's phone, investigators recovered a photo of Jasmine standing in his bathroom on the night she disappeared. They also found screenshots of text messages from Jasmine, though the content of the messages was missing. The morning following Jasmine's apparent death, Jason sent her a photo captioned, "Slept like a baby," followed by a text later that day saying, "We'll meet again tonight." Metadata revealed the photo had been taken 2 years earlier. Jasmine's phone records showed she visited Walmart with Jason on the morning she disappeared, but surveillance footage only captured Jason shopping alone. Investigators traced Jason's movements, revealing that he loaded a large suitcase into his Toyota Camry and drove to Suck Creek Road near the riverbank. On December 1st, Thursday, investigators found a suitcase along the riverbank. It belonged to Jason and contained Jasmine's body. She was wrapped in 3 garbage bags and restrained with handcuffs. Her right hand was cuffed to her right ankle, while her left ankle was cuffed to her right elbow. The handcuffs were basic models, not police issue, with one chain broken. An autopsy confirmed Jasmine had been fatally attacked, with the bullet concentrated in a single area of her body. In December 2022, Jason Chen's bail was set at $5 million, sparking outrage due to the disturbing details of Jasmine's murder. Many believed he shouldn't have been offered bail at all. Evidence revealed that Jason had accessed Jasmine's phone and SIM card to manage her bank account and post fake messages after her death. During his opening statement on the first day of court proceedings, lawyer Josh Weiss did not claim his client's innocence. He acknowledged that Jason killed Jasmine but argued that it was unintentional. The prosecution did not pursue the death penalty. If convicted of first-degree murder, Jason faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. His best chance for a lighter sentence would be to plead to a lesser charge, such as manslaughter. To do this, the defense aimed to convince the jury that Jason killed Jasmine in a moment of passion, having been provoked into an extreme emotional reaction that resulted in her death. The defense's arguments suggested that they had been drinking wine late at night at Jason's home, and that Jasmine had gone to the kitchen to get water. While there, she allegedly heard constant notifications from a dating app on Jason's phone. This led to an argument between the two, during which Jasmine reportedly attacked Jason with a broken wine glass. Jason, who had earlier taken a kitchen knife to his bedroom to open a bottle of wine, used the knife during the struggle. The defense explained the stains on Jasmine's body as part of an incident that occurred after the attack. They claimed Jason panicked after the attack and handcuffed Jasmine to fit her into a suitcase. Video recordings from Jason and Jasmine's phones, along with testimony from neighbors, provided a timeline of the murder and Jason's attempts to cover it up. Neighbor Courtney Brewer testified to hearing an argument after 2 a.m. The reconstruction of the murder relied heavily on the physical evidence found at the crime scene, but this is where the case became complicated. Police applied a chemical to various items at the crime scene, including a broken knife. Katrina inspected and searched the crime scene. The defense later called its expert to highlight significant changes observed between the initial police response and the scene's documentation. Furniture had been moved, and questions arose about whether certain items were relevant evidence. Travis testified that, when he initially entered the room with Katrina to find their daughter, he didn't see a knife on the bed. The medical examiner determined the attack was deliberate and found no suspicious evidence contradicting this conclusion. Based on the location of the wounds, Jasmine was likely in a fetal position during the assault. The handcuffs she wore were most likely applied while she was still alive. Additionally, the medical examiner found no alcohol in her system, which contradicted Jason's claim that they had been drinking wine. Jason's argument that Jasmine provoked him by becoming angry over dating app notifications was proven false. A state expert reviewed the app's data and confirmed no notifications were received. Jason chose not to testify in his defense. Evidence was presented quickly. Jason's lawyer withdrew support for his initial story, instead highlighting the absence of handcuff marks on Jasmine's wrists, which would have been visible if she had been alive when restrained. The presence of handcuffs suggested that the attack was premeditated. The number of wounds indicated that Jason had sufficient time to think through and carry out the assault. During closing arguments, prosecutor Cody Vamp outlined the sequence of events, including Courtney Brewer hearing someone running to the apartment door at 2 a.m. The jury began deliberating after the final arguments and delivered a verdict shortly afterward. One juror confirmed that the repeated visits by Jasmine Pace's family to the crime scene did not influence their decision. At the sentencing phase, jurors had to decide whether Jason Chen should ever be eligible for parole. Jason's attorney appealed to the jury, asking them to grant his client a chance for redemption. However, the jury deliberated for less than an hour and ultimately convicted Jason Chen of first-degree murder, sentencing him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Following the conviction, Jasmine Pace's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Jason Chen's parents. They accused the parents of harboring Jason, giving him money, and sharing information during the days after the murder while he was the prime suspect and their daughter was still missing. The loss of Jasmine and the ensuing legal battles deeply affected the Pace family. After the sentencing, the trials surrounding Jason Chen, referred to by the family as a monster, were marked by overwhelming grief. Prosecutors condemned his crime as heinous, cruel, and inhumane. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Sweppel family. Stephen Sweppel graduated from a local university in the 80s with a degree in business and planned to build his finances during his studies. He worked various jobs, including as a bartender and lifeguard, but he always remained modest. When Stephen met Cheryl, they got to know each other, and the lovers became inseparable. Thus began a relationship in which they complemented each other excellently. At university, she was very smart and loved working with children, therefore, she became a social studies teacher, actively participating in everything from book and religious gatherings to various events with her beloved. Some time later, they got married. It seemed like a perfect union, destined to last forever. After several unsuccessful attempts to have children, Cheryl decided not to take any risks. As a result, they decided to adopt. Cheryl has adopted 4 children into her family, which was a thrilling experience for her, as she had always wanted to be a mother for those who needed it during their childhood. In the large house where they lived, Ethan, the eldest of all the adopted children, was born in 1998. They liked him very much because he was greatly interested in everything. He was showing energy that they appreciated for the sake of the family. Their 4th child, Eleanor, was born in 2005. She was the youngest of them all. Events brought a stable income, therefore, their family was always filled with warmth and harmony. This is not a classic story of career success. Cheryl left her school job after more than a decade, allowing her to spend more time with her children. She regularly started visiting her children's parents and grandparents, who lived a few kilometers away. They became local celebrities. A wealthy family adopting 4 children took on real parental roles. They wanted to give their growing generation as much as possible. In February 2008, everything turned upside down. The bank found itself in danger due to an incident involving the theft of over $500,000. Investigative organizations that were involved dismissed Stephen. But that was not the end. The investigation lasted longer than necessary to maintain its progress since there was no overwhelming evidence of his involvement. Ultimately, it was revealed that his position was affected by the economic crisis in 2007, related to problems in the mortgage market and over-indebtedness. Stephen sought to create a financial cushion that was plausible, as he was hard at work during that period. In a constant state of stress, a person is prone to making mistakes. New information reveals that throughout this time, they were indeed becoming the center of public attention, as the waste of such an amount appeared to be a source of sensational news regarding involvement in financial crime. Stephen lived under significant, constant pressure, especially from Cheryl, which irritated him. Totaling $559,040 over 7 years, was also reported. Stephen has pleaded not guilty, but has indicated to investigators that he did indeed transfer the money into a personal account. Like Cheryl, others did not understand that real problems had begun, which posed a significant issue for the family. More information on the 2008 financial crimes indicated that bail was set to remain free, scheduled for April 21 of the same year. In the event of a guilty plea for the serious crime, the minimum sentence would range from 3 to 5 years, after which a possibility might arise. A significant blow followed, not only to Stephen's reputation but also to their relationships in America. Sweppel family began to collapse, and they often struggled with the consequences. A true storm from the outside awaited them. However, they remained sociable and polite, despite the stress and mental disturbances that could affect future events. On Sunday morning, the Sweppel family attended Easter Mass at St. Mary's Catholic Church. Stephen and Cheryl's parents were also present at the Mass and later said they did not notice anything unusual about anyone's behavior. That evening, a family friend stopped by the Sweppels' home to check on Stephen. The friend saw one of the children, but saw nothing unusual. In fact, a terrible tragedy occurred. On March 23, 2008 morning at 6:31 a.m., Sweppel called 911 from his cell phone, asking for police to come to his home immediately and hanging up without giving his name. When police arrived at his home, they found Sweppel's wife, Cheryl, and their 4 adopted children, Ethan, 10, Seth, 9, Mira, 5, and Eleanor, 3, dead from multiple blunt force injuries to the upper body and head. Police recovered the alleged murder weapons, 2 baseball bats, at the scene. According to forensic experts, at the time of her death, Cheryl was around 30 years old and likely died around at 11:30 p.m. At the same time as Sweppel left a series of voice messages apologizing to former colleagues and relatives. Stephen Sweppel left a note for his father and brother at their law firm. In the note, he said his family was in heaven. According to Stephen, they were doomed to humiliation, and inevitably, he would end up in prison. According to the letter Stephen wrote, he gathered his 4 children into the family van parked in the garage and attempted to kill them then himself with carbon monoxide poisoning. When that didn't work, Stephen took the children back into the house and beat them to death. The 3 oldest children were found in their bedrooms. Eleanor, the youngest, was found downstairs in the playroom. Investigators soon uncovered that Stephen had murdered their entire family, revealing that reliable information was scarce. Cheryl was probably killed during the initial attempt to cover up the crime using carbon monoxide poisoning. Nevertheless, he lacked the courage to take his own life and refused to surrender. In the face of his wife's and children's horrific death, he can't separate death from life. Approximately at 6:36 a.m., unsuccessful attempts became more evident when Sweppel died in a tragic crash on Interstate 80 outside Iowa City. Witnesses said the driver was speeding and appeared to intentionally hit a concrete pillar. There were virtually no signs of slowing down at 100 kilometers per hour. Upon impact, the car overturned. They discovered a badly charred body, from which identification was initially impossible. The community reported that the threat was gone, not ignoring the risk that he may have orchestrated his death to evade justice. The charred remains were identified using dental records, to everyone's relief amidst the horrifying events now unfolding. It was hard to comprehend that they had been a respectable family, even if a bit of alcohol mixed with substances had been a fabrication that no one could believe or confirm. His loved ones often felt overwhelming sorrow. The event struck the entire community hard, as their lives had been brutally cut short. Stephen was not just a son-in-law to them, but a beloved son, and they sincerely mourned his death. On March 24, Their youngest child was to turn 3 years old. The term annihilator describes a phenomenon where a person kills their entire family. In this case, committing took his own life was akin to this situation. In 68% of cases involving family annihilators, they often kill to spare their loved ones from future suffering. Decent family men may seem like role models for family life, even if they begin to exhibit violent tendencies. The fact that Cheryl decided to return to work might have weighed heavily on him. Meanwhile, the mystery of the $500,000 stolen from the bank remains unsolved. Some believe everything is connected to the house that remained after settling the mortgage before going to court. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bill Mowbray. Bill Mowbray lived in Brownsville, Texas, USA, in 1987. He was a decent and loving man who was married to Susie. This was his second marriage. From his first marriage, Bill had a daughter named Christine, who lived with her mother. When Susie met Bill, she was also divorced and had brought her 2 children to live with them. Over the past 9 years, they have built a happy family together. They were only 4 years apart in age and shared many things in common. Despite Susie's eccentric personality, Bill thought of her as the ideal wife. Bill was dedicated not only to his family but also to his career. After attending college, he began working in car sales and eventually transformed into a prominent businessman. By 1987, he had successfully managed Mal Motors, a Cadillac dealership in Brownsville, for 13 years. Susie actively supported his work, often visiting the dealership and even appearing in commercials broadcast across the city. Their success brought them considerable wealth, making them local celebrities regularly seen on TV. The family enjoyed traveling and owned a large mansion in Brownsville, 2 beachfront villas, and several luxury cars. On the surface, their life appeared enviable, but in reality, it was far less glamorous. In recent years, Bill's business had struggled, with the dealership stagnating and showing no signs of growth. Bill realized he was sinking deeper into debt because his expenses far exceeded his income. Despite facing financial difficulties, they upheld an image of wealth and continued to spend lavishly. As their money problems worsened, it became evident they were facing a serious financial crisis. By 1987, the situation had also severely impacted Bill's mental health. He began suffering from depression and often voiced that ending his own life might be the only way to escape their predicament. For Susie, this was an extremely difficult time. Her husband had never spoken or behaved this way before, and she feared he might do something drastic. His relatives were equally concerned for his well-being. They arranged consultations with a psychotherapist in the hopes of helping him, but their efforts yielded little progress. Bill remained firm in his belief that their family urgently needed money, otherwise, the business would collapse, leaving them on the verge of poverty. A solution to their financial struggles seemed nowhere in sight. Facing the threat of bankruptcy, Susie and Bill ultimately believed their best hope lay in securing a new loan from the bank. On September 15, 1987, Susie, 39, and Bill, 43, called to wish Susie's son a happy 16th birthday. At the time, her son and daughter were visiting their father. The conversation was warm and enjoyable, and everything seemed normal. Later that evening, Susie and Bill watched a TV show together before heading to bed. In the early hours of the morning, around 2:15 a.m., Susie woke up to the terrifying scene of her husband holding a weapon pointed at his own head. Before she could react, he pulled the trigger, using his right hand while lying on his side. Shocked and terrified, Susie called out to him, but he didn't respond. Blood rapidly soaked the bed, and with mounting horror, she realized the gravity of his injury. Panicked, she rushed to the home phone to seek help but accidentally dialed the number of her work partner, Bill Luke Roy, instead of emergency services. Susie told Luke what had happened and confessed she didn't know what to do. Luke immediately urged her to call 911. She followed the advice and called the emergency services. However, she had already lost precious minutes, which forced the ambulance to set off immediately. When the ambulance crew arrived at the scene, they found Susie outside the house, standing calmly with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other. Showing no signs of distress, she led the paramedics inside and gestured toward the bedroom without entering it. Inside, Bill was lying on the bed, still alive but in critical condition. He was rushed to the hospital, where he later passed away. The cause of death was clear: a weapon injury to the head. Beside him lay a weapon in a pool of blood. Initially, investigators suspected that he had harmed himself, but they decided to carry out a more thorough investigation before reaching any conclusions. Forensic experts began analyzing the scene. The unusually large volume of blood warranted a detailed investigation. Blood spatters were found on much of the furniture, on the wall near the bed, and even on the ceiling fan. Fortunately, a blood spatter expert was brought in to assist. The expert confirmed that Bill had died from a single wound to the head. The only fingerprints found on the weapon during testing were Bill's. Susie has consistently maintained her perspective on the story since the beginning, asserting that Bill suffered from prolonged depression, had a tendency to harm himself, and had expressed these thoughts to multiple people on several occasions. Some of her statements were corroborated by her relatives and friends, as well as Bill's. Bill, a businessman, had been facing mounting challenges in managing his dealership, which seemed to have worsened his mental health. However, Susie's behavior raised significant doubts. She does not seem to be a grieving widow. Instead, she discusses her husband's death calmly, as though it were merely a trivial matter. Still, this wasn't the primary reason investigators began to scrutinize her further. The most shocking detail emerged in the 12 hours following Bill's death. During this time, Jim, Bill's brother, arrived at Bill's residence intending to speak with Susie, offer her support, and try to piece together what had happened by observing the scene. To his surprise, when Jim went upstairs, he heard music and the laughter of women. When he knocked, Susie came out casually and explained that she was hosting a party with friends. Jim found her behavior to be deeply inappropriate and upsetting. Later, Jim became one of Susie's most vocal critics as she desperately tried to prove her innocence. It was discovered that the women attending the gathering had removed all the furniture and carpeting from the bedroom. Not only were they listening to music and socializing, but the most alarming revelation was that they had repainted the bedroom a different color. Police viewed these actions as obvious attempts to interfere with evidence. Despite these suspicious actions, the blood expert successfully reconstructed the sequence of the incident. It is now clear that the case had nothing to do with Bill's self-harm. Detectives became convinced that Susie was the one who had pulled the trigger. Based on evidence collected on the first day, there appeared to be little doubt remaining. The focus then shifted to the remaining pieces of furniture and the nightgown Susie had been wearing. After thorough analysis, the expert concluded that Bill had been murdered by his wife, who had attacked him in the head while he was asleep. Susie was shocked when accused and immediately sought legal help by hiring a lawyer. The financial difficulties in their family's marriage have been confirmed by multiple sources. Susie said that Bill's unsuccessful attempt to obtain a bank loan led him to harm himself. Bill's family was aware of his dire financial situation, but not everyone believed that Susie was completely innocent. Detectives interviewed a loan officer at the bank who had interacted with Bill. The officer recounted how Bill had visited the bank in a deeply distraught state, even breaking down in tears. Bill reportedly stated that, without approval for a $200,000 loan, he would die. Unfortunately, Bill's financial situation was bleak, and his loan application was rejected. The loan officer had no choice but to turn him down. Numerous witnesses attested to Bill's desperation and emotional turmoil. Despite this evidence of Bill's deteriorating mental health, suspicions about Susie remained strong. Her behavior following her husband's death was widely perceived as celebratory rather than mournful. This interpretation led to widespread public condemnation and further distrust of her character. However, her lawyer firmly maintained her innocence. Bill Mowbray, a businessman, applied for a bank loan to keep his business running and pay off existing debts. However, the bank's refusal devastated him. That evening, he returned home deeply distressed and barely interacted with anyone. Susie did her best to console him, but her efforts did little to ease his despair. In the final days of his life, Bill fell into a severe depression as he desperately searched for a solution to his financial crisis. Later, Susie shared that after this incident, Bill frequently spoke about ending his life. She tried to support him by accompanying him to a psychotherapist. The lawyer worked to find evidence that substantiated Susie's claims, and succeeded. Several of Bill's longtime friends revealed that, approximately a decade before the tragedy, Bill had attempted to end his life. This had occurred in the 1970s, before Susie and Bill married, which explained why Susie had never mentioned it. After meeting Susie, his life seemed to improve, and those close to him believed that his past struggles had been overcome. This information further reinforces the narrative that Bill has a history of self-harm. The defense attorney believed this evidence would strongly support Susie if the case went to trial. He dismissed the notion that Susie was implicated in the crime by the gathering at their house following the tragedy. Furthermore, he argued that the prosecution's case relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be easily challenged. Susie's unusual behavior was not enough to indicate that she might resort to violence. Bill's family, however, argued that Susie's actions demonstrated a complete lack of empathy toward him. Meanwhile, an outraged Jim demanded justice for Bill and insisted that the killer be held responsible. Investigators suspect that someone else may have been involved in the crime and are questioning the circumstances surrounding the incident. Specifically, they were puzzled why Bill chose to end his life while lying next to his wife in bed. Typically, individuals who wish to end their lives tend to prefer doing so in solitude. If Bill were to choose to end his own life, he would have two methods to consider: either keeping a loaded weapon nearby, such as placing it by his bed or under his pillow, or waking up in the middle of the night, retrieving the weapon, and returning to bed before using it. Susie claimed she didn't notice Bill getting up at night, though it's possible she simply didn't wake up. She mentioned that she had once handled her husband's weapon after discovering it under the pillow. She explained that he kept it in the bedroom for self-defense, adding that such behavior was typical among Texans. Detectives, however, questioned why there were no fingerprints on the weapon if Susie had truly picked it up. Susie claimed that Bill regularly cleaned and wiped the weapon, but investigators remained skeptical. They began scrutinizing the dynamics of Susie's and Bill's relationship. During the inquiry, they discovered that she had multiple extramarital affairs during her marriage, and, importantly, Bill was aware of them. After numerous acts of infidelity, she and her children had left him and moved to Austin. However, Bill eventually persuaded her to return, and they resumed living together. Despite this reconciliation, many believed the relationship remained deeply strained. Susie and Bill were preparing for a divorce and discussing how to divide their assets, which created significant tension and might have given her a motive to murder her husband. Susie's behavior following the incident raised further suspicions. After the incident, upon realizing that her husband was seriously injured but still alive, she chose not to call an ambulance, a decision that might have increased his chances of survival. Instead, she called a colleague, Bill Luke Roy. Susie claimed she was confused and unsure of what to do in such a situation, so she sought advice from a family friend. This initially led some to speculate that Luke might have been involved in the crime, though no evidence supported this theory. According to Luke, Susie's voice lacked any signs of panic during their phone call. Nonetheless, Luke advised her to contact emergency services, which Susie did without hesitation after speaking with him. When experts investigated the scene and examined Bill's body, they discovered a bullet wound in his left hand. Strangely, despite the close-range attack, Susie, Bill's wife, was not covered in blood. Forensic experts noted that an attack at point-blank range typically produces small blood droplets. However, Bill's right hand was found neatly tucked beneath the pillow, which makes the possibility of him causing harm to himself in this manner highly unlikely. The prosecution built a strong case with a solid motive: financial gain. Susie, Bill's wife, appeared to benefit greatly from her husband's death, particularly in terms of insurance. Shortly before his death, Bill had made significant changes to his insurance policy. He increased the payout amount to nearly $2 million but removed Susie as a beneficiary. Instead, he designated the payout to his daughter from a previous marriage, Christine. Susie had even contacted the insurance company in advance to confirm the details of the policy. Crucially, these changes to the policy were set to take effect just days after Bill's death. During her call with the insurance company, Susie uncovered crucial information, which indirectly pointed to the possibility of a motive to act quickly. With Bill weighed down by financial troubles, his death could secure the money needed to resolve their outstanding debts. Apparently, Bill had removed Susie from the beneficiary list due to a lack of trust in her and instead sought to provide lifelong financial security for his daughter. This situation raised several troubling implications. Firstly, if Bill had planned his own death, he likely would have waited for the amended insurance policy to officially take effect, which would have occurred in just a few days. Furthermore, as someone knowledgeable in legal and financial matters, he would have been aware of Texas laws regarding voluntary death. Specifically, insurance policies do not pay out compensation to beneficiaries if the insured dies voluntarily within 2 years of the policy's activation. This means all of Bill's intentions to secure his daughter's future were doomed from the outset. Detectives believed that Bill had no intention of ending his life willingly. When he spoke about such matters, it was likely to evoke pity or manipulate others, such as persuading the bank to grant him a loan. However, given the strange circumstances surrounding his death, it seemed he didn't end his life himself, someone might have helped him. Based on circumstantial evidence, Susie was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. At the trial, a key forensic method was used: blood spatter analysis. This technique, first introduced in the 1950s by Herbert MacDonald, played a critical role in providing evidence and substantiating the charges. MacDonald himself testified during Susie's trial, offering essential insights. Blood spatter analysis had been a foundational method in the U.S. justice system and widely accepted for years. However, in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences raised doubts about its reliability, emphasizing that accurate and meaningful use of the analysis requires significant expertise and experience. Evidence in Bill's murder case was analyzed by inexperienced experts, but this oversight was overlooked during the trial. Although blood sample analysis has been heavily criticized, it remains valuable and continues to be used, now exclusively by highly qualified and experienced specialists. In the past, doubts about this method had led to the reconsideration of several convictions. However, by the time of Susie's case, Herbert MacDonald's method was widely accepted and largely unquestioned. During the trial, Susie's ex-husband defended her, stating that he had never observed any signs of aggression throughout their relationship. He also stated that Susie was not even aware of how to use a weapon. Additionally, a family friend named Luke, Bill's business partner and Susie's initial point of contact after the incident, supported her and expressed his belief that Bill may have willingly ended his own life. Luke explained that he had planned to leave the car dealership due to work-related issues, and this decision had deeply affected Bill. In the final days of Bill's life, he reportedly struggled with loneliness. The prosecutor's office persisted in proving its case. To strengthen its argument, it presented the marital bed as evidence during the trial, complete with 2 mannequins representing Bill and Susie, as well as traces of Bill's blood that were still visible. This allowed the prosecution to vividly illustrate its version of what transpired on that tragic night. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury ultimately convicted Susie of murder, sentencing her on June 5, 1988, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Susie still had a group of supporters who believed in her innocence, including her son, Wade, and her daughter from a previous marriage. Both worked tirelessly to overturn the conviction, firmly convinced that Susie had stood by her husband until the very end and was incapable of violence against him. While Susie served time in prison, Wade enrolled in law school and dedicated himself to meticulously reviewing the case. He searched for errors or misconduct by the prosecution and investigators, hoping to find grounds for an appeal. Wade collaborated closely with his mother's lawyer to challenge the verdict and fight for justice. The case required processing a massive amount of complex information, which made the effort time-consuming. Wade was determined to secure justice as Susie had already spent 8 years in prison. Eventually, Susie's lawyer submitted a critical appeal that could not be dismissed. During the prosecution's case, the blood spatter analysis played a key role, but serious concerns emerged about whether the forensic expert had been qualified to handle this aspect. The expert had examined over 40 stains found on the nightgown. Interestingly, the prosecution's main piece of evidence turned out to be its biggest weakness. The defense disputed the accuracy of the tests conducted on the nightgown, arguing that various substances, not just blood, could cause the fabric to glow. Moreover, the nightgown had never been specifically tested for blood, and since it was no longer available, its credibility as evidence was entirely compromised. The appeal was accepted, leading to a thorough reconsideration of the evidence before the 1990 retrial. The absence of blood spatter on the weapon can be explained as follows. The gunshot to Bill's left arm likely occurred while he was holding the weapon under the pillow, with his left hand positioned on the opposite side of his head. The shot caused an exit wound. Certain actions of the experts during the retrial seemed questionable. For instance, the forensic expert who conducted Bill's autopsy made a key statement. Although he admitted that he could not be absolutely certain Susie had killed Bill, he maintained, perhaps to protect his reputation, that Bill could not have harmed himself without external assistance. Given that only Bill and Susie were in the house, Susie was naturally seen as the prime suspect. Wade's legal studies and collaboration with attorneys proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that violated Susie's constitutional right to a fair trial. A major revelation emerged when the prosecution brought in Herbert McDonald to re-examine Susie's nightgown and the prior findings. Contrary to the prosecutor's expectations, McDonald decisively refuted the arguments supporting Susie's guilt. However, rather than sharing McDonald's expert opinion, the prosecution deliberately concealed it and continued relying on the flawed evidence against Susie. Wade played a vital role in the fight for his mother's freedom. He now faced the challenge of presenting his findings to convince the jury. His analysis revealed deception on the prosecution's part, which violated the Brady Rule, a requirement for prosecutors to disclose all evidence that could potentially exonerate the defendant. McDonald's findings were pivotal in exposing this misconduct. Finally, Susie's day in court arrived in January 1998. By then, the once vibrant woman had been deeply affected by her years in prison, reduced to a shadow of her former self. Yet, in her weary eyes, there remained a glimmer of hope. She continued to steadfastly maintain her innocence. Susie's friends, who attended the same unusual gathering where the bedroom was repainted after her husband's death, described the event as an odd prank. They explained that it was initiated by a woman attempting to cover up the unsettling red stains in the room. According to them, Susie was unaware that her actions would later lead to accusations of evidence tampering. Both friends defended her, with one stating that the room had not been cordoned off with police tape and no warning had been issued that the investigation was ongoing. In fact, investigators initially concluded that Bill's death was a result of self-harm and showed little interest in the scene. They had planned to close the case and archive it, allowing Susie to remain in the house without implementing any security measures, such as sealing the room with police tape. The other friend explained that the group merely wanted to help Susie, who hesitated to let her children return to a bedroom stained with blood. Influenced by alcohol, they decided to repaint the room before the kids came home. Neither friend believed that Susie was guilty of any wrongdoing. During the retrial, an unqualified expert who had analyzed Susie's nightgown admitted that his original testimony at her first trial was baseless and lacked scientific foundation. Forensic expert Herbert McDonald reviewed the flawed methods used in the investigation and expressed disbelief. The stains were measured visually without proper tools, and there was no confirmation that the stains were even blood. As a result, the evidence was deemed unconvincing. Susie's lawyer presented a compelling argument during the trial, which led the jury to reconsider their stance. They began to entertain the possibility that Bill, Susie's husband, had voluntarily chosen to end his own life. Substantial evidence later emerged, outweighing the vague testimonies provided by several of Bill's friends. The defense strategy focused on one key factor underlying the tragedy: Bill's financial difficulties. After his loan application was denied, his business faced imminent collapse, pushing his family close to poverty. To ensure that his daughter from a previous marriage would receive a larger insurance payout, Bill is said to have decided to end his own life. He spent his remaining savings on increasing the life insurance payout for her. Bill's decision not to wait just a few additional days may have been driven by severe depression or a sudden deterioration in his mental health, which could have left him incapable of fully understanding the legal implications. Accounts of Bill's behavior in the days leading up to his death supported this conclusion. The defense attorney believed their case had been effectively argued. However, during the closing arguments, Susie unexpectedly lost control. As the prosecution delivered its final remarks, she screamed that she had not killed her husband and collapsed in tears. This emotional outburst took everyone by surprise. On one hand, the jury recognized the sincerity in Susie's tears and assertions of innocence. On the other hand, her uncontrolled aggression complicated the situation. Deliberations over the verdict lasted for 4 hours of tense uncertainty. Although no definitive resolution was reached regarding Susie's guilt or innocence, she was ultimately acquitted of all charges on January 23, 1998. Despite her acquittal, she continued to face opposition, with critics focusing heavily on her behavior throughout the trial. While Susie's actions were undoubtedly unusual at times, her supporters, including her son and daughter, attributed her behavior to the emotional toll and stress she endured during the ordeal. Her opponents, however, claimed that her outburst during the trial was a calculated attempt to manipulate the jury. In contrast, her lawyer argued that the outburst was unplanned, insisting that such a risky tactic would have been ill-advised, particularly since the defense had already presented substantial evidence that might have backfired with the jury. During subsequent hearings, it was revealed that the nightgown had never been used as evidence. This omission raised concerns among the investigative team, as items of such significance rarely vanish without explanation. Speculation arose that the prosecution, facing heavy criticism for their strategy, may have intentionally disposed of the nightgown to prevent further examination. This theory gained traction as many believed the nightgown might have undermined their case, particularly given the opinion of Herbert MacDonald, whose expertise could have discredited their claims. Faced with mounting challenges, the prosecution seemingly had no viable path to continue their case. Susie Mowbray was acquitted on her 50th birthday, turning the occasion into a celebratory milestone. She expressed her gratitude to her son, Wade, describing it as the best anniversary gift she had ever received. In a 2001 interview, she reflected on her release, noting that others who had been wrongfully convicted alongside her had already been freed for 3 years. Susie had spent nearly a decade in prison and shared her hope that her children would feel proud of their mother. However, not everyone supported the verdict. Bill's first wife and his daughter, Christine, believed the outcome was unjust, remaining convinced that Susie had evaded accountability for murder. After Bill's death, his first wife revealed that Susie had urgently sold off all of his belongings to secure money. This led to a fierce legal battle between Bill's first wife and Susie over his inheritance. Ultimately, no one received the life insurance payout. Susie had once planned to write a book about her struggles, but since 2002, there has been no news about her. During that time, she went to court in an attempt to reclaim Bill's insurance payout, but she ultimately lost the case. Susie's son, Wade, initially pursued a legal career but eventually left the field to provide advice to other clergymen. Interestingly, Susie, who had previously sought public attention and appeared in her husband's advertising campaigns in the 1980s, completely disappeared from public view after her failed attempt to secure the insurance funds. She did not attend the TV show in 2021 that covered her case, though her lawyer did. The lawyer described her situation as a tragedy, emphasizing that the businessman's widow had spent so many years behind bars, which had destroyed her life, while insisting he had always believed in her innocence.